Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Stephen, be good and don't open up to anyone but mom and dad. Giving her son final instructions, Camille was spinning in front of the mirror in the hallway. Mommy, don't go, quietly asked the little one and pulled my skirt, attracting attention. We'll be back soon. Well, we will bring guests, said Christopher. Son, and sitting down next to him, put his huge palms on his shoulders. Encouraging squeezed. You're growing up to be a man, so act like one. Sit and watch cartoons. Don't be afraid of anything. Well, enough with him. We're already late. Irritably threw the young woman, adding she lips, fracture, poison, lipstick, and for some reason it was madly annoying how patiently sometimes her husband began to talk to the baby. Christopher was 23 years older than his wife. They married in a hurry, thereby giving many friends and acquaintances a reason to joke that someone had time to jump in the last carriage, so as not to remain in his old age bachelor, who favorably arranged his lost life without a native. In general, Camille was greeted coolly in Christopher's entourage. What was to blame? It was her origins, but also temperament and habits and attitudes were all gone. And while he waved his hand, Camille, and smiled as her son repeated the gesture. The door closed, the key turned in the lock, and Stephen was left alone. Outside the window it was slowly getting dusk. The three-room apartment, whose windows overlooked the courtyard, closed on all sides by other houses, was gradually filling with walls, and in some places with darkness. The kid did not like the latter and was very afraid of it. But now he could be brave. For in every room there was a light left for him. Stephen still stood for a little while, vaguely hoping that his parents would change their minds and come back, but then reconciled slowly. Protopopov, a large room, which served as both a living room and a nursery. He climbed onto the sofa and took the TV remote, pressed a button and the screen lighted up, showing something funny and cartoon, and put on the right channel at all before the boy was already at home. But the day we only for a couple of minutes, while mom literally took out the trash. And so Camille, as a housewife on the full provision of her husband, could afford not to give the child to kindergarten. It wasn't even possible. 6-year-old Stephen was panic-stricken by everything unfamiliar. It was difficult to make contact with others, and even more so with adults. He shunned any fuss and moving games, in general, any violations of his usual cozy routine. He was taken to a psychologist, but he found it all age-related. This happens, and it is better to just wait it out. The baby's development is generally progressing as it should. Christopher and Camille could theoretically ask one of the neighbors to look after their son, but decided it was not necessary. They're fussy and worried about themselves. The thing is that they were suddenly invited to visit distant relatives who had just returned from the capital, where they had their own business. In general, these people arranged a large gathering of people wanting to restore blood ties, to return to their roots. Finally, when so much time and effort had been put into making things happen, Christopher hoped that they would help him get a proper job. Not in the capital, of course, but there would be the right connections. For more than 30 years he had worked as a bricklayer, but recently the construction firm where he worked went bankrupt, and it was not easy to find a new place at his age. Camille is just passionate. How she wanted to sit at home, wiping her son's nose, as she herself put it frankly. I could live like that, Camille dreamed. She was going to be 32 in a year. What had she accomplished? Sometimes she cried quietly into her pillow, and her husband and her nettles night after night without hearing. Camille and her sisters were born in the village to a family, as they said, a lost one. The parents drank. The daughters grew like weeds. When the eldest Camille was 12, they died, despite being taken in by an aunt. Camille had to become a mother to the 4-year-old Emily, and also work in the house and in the vegetable garden. The aunt immediately put her sisters in their place, saying that she would not tolerate freeloaders. Naturally, any higher education was out of the question. Only work at the house from 14 until graduation as a saleswoman in a store on weekends, and then full-time. And naturally, all the wages were taken away by her aunt. Camille met her future husband 11 years ago when he came in to buy mineral water and apples. Christopher came to visit acquaintances and also to improve his health in nature. The doctor insisted that if he didn't take care of his vessels properly, he could have a stroke before retirement. They just exchanged a few words. He replied that they were local city folk. Somehow the conversation got going. Christopher told him he'd been divorced a long time ago, so single, alone in his apartment. Camille realized that the absorbent cotton was her chance. They saw each other again and again. The man was touched by the girl's selflessness, her care for her younger sister. He fell in love. He did not delay with the proposal to legalize the relationship in a large apartment, which Christopher's parents still received. There was room for his wife's younger sister. Emily gave him a fatherly feeling. He hoped that the girl could go to university. But Emily's coming of age was barely celebrated. She left home. That's probably all Camille said about her, with her lips pressed together. Christopher was shocked. He'd never offended a girl in any way. It was disconcerting, of course, how the sisters sometimes quarreled violently. And the occasions were petty. But is that a reason to leave home? To live first with some shady acquaintances, and then, I dread to think, to get a job as a dancer in a nightclub. Christopher talks about a truce and assures Emily that he won't let her get hurt. The girl, who became after leaving an independent voyage of an unknown spectacular beauty, said that she simply cannot leave her nephew for his sake, will come to visit and carried fruit kilograms. In winter she gave him toys, helped him dress for last fall, and generously helped with money. Although Christopher assured that they coped because he was proud and it was shameful to accept material help from a girl, preparing to be a daughter, and even earning in this way. Time went by. Stephen watched cartoons, then ate some cookies left for him in the kitchen and drank some iced tea. The little boy thought that it was not so scary to be alone. But then suddenly the light in the apartment suddenly went out, swallowed him. Darkness dissipated only by a ghostly light from the window. As always it piles up, drag, no wiggle, creeping quietly, thump, snore. The baby was twisting his head and breathing frequently. I wanted to scream, to cry. But it was frightening that if at least there was no sand, those lurking in the dark would rush to him. Mom called softly, listened. Daddy listened again. Somewhere in the bathroom, the pipes slammed. It had happened before, but it sounded different now. Stephen had no doubt that those scary monsters, but already ready to play cat and mouse with him. The kid carefully lowered his legs to the couch, pulled the warm plaid and covered himself with it, leaving it hanging like a cloak. And then what sometimes happens by accident happened. A thing just fell. My mother had put some box on the edge of the shelf, and it, losing its balance, fell. Stephen at that moment was looking out the window. How nice it was. Lots and lots of lights on. That would be to sneak away, so as not to be caught by those who live in the dark. And this noise from the corridor was the last straw for the nerves of the kid. He climbed up on the table, then stood on the table by the window, pulled the handle with all his might. The sashes fell off and the coolness of the October evening poured into the room. The noise of cars started along the road hidden by the houses, and the main thing now was the chase. Saw lights, lanterns, windows of apartments. Stephen had never been so close to Oban Heights in his life, and it made a strange impression on him. There was something mysterious about the freshly opened expanse of twinkling lights, as if you were opening the first page of a picture book. Anticipating, but not knowing exactly what awaited next, the little boy suddenly realized that here from the very windowsill, he was not the least bit afraid of what awaited him in the darkness of the apartment. He sat on the windowsill with his legs out and looked out into the yard, where everything seemed so small. Funny, it was like that for about 5 minutes. The little boy was not distinguished by obedience, even with his parents, but an unfamiliar voice somehow made him do it. Croa froze, staring with wide-open eyes in front of him. "Calm down. Everything will be all right." The window of the room where Stephen was sitting was close to the balcony of the neighboring apartment where the man had just stepped out. His purpose was prosaically to look out into the distance, to breathe the air where it felt like the onset of real winter, to think about his own thoughts. The blackout didn't bother him. By the way, he lit a battery-operated lamp, and then he noticed the baby. It was a short distance from the balcony, so he could reach it. "What's your name?" "My name is John. I'm your neighbor." Stephen answered the boy. "What are you doing here?" "You sit quietly in there, dark and scary, and I'm not coming out of there. It's better, all right. You're not scared. You're calm. You look at me, and it's okay. I'm going to take you in my arms now." "Okay. Why?" "Because you can't sit here, and you can't go in the dark. Right? Aha. Aren't you scared? You didn't move. Look at me, all right." That's when Evelyn and Grandma came back from their walk. The former was an old lady who cared about everything that went on in her yard and her house, and the other one was her terrier dog, and happened to be in the habit of gazing around the house from bottom to top. Evelyn noticed a child in the dark window opening. The old woman gasped, and then screamed in terror. Stephen heard the screams as he fell out of the cozy poo trance that the voice had plunged him into. Suddenly, he realized that there was emptiness below and darkness behind, and he became very frightened. The boy roared and kicked himself, but nothing irreparable happened. The man managed to bend over the balcony and grab the child, and in a moment he was finally really out of danger from the 9th floor. "You're not crying?" He looked into the baby's eyes. John and Stephen nodded. Sobs. "One last time. Let's go inside." Opened the door from the balcony and entered his apartment. Put the boy in the big padded chair and sat down next to him, so that his eyes were level with the child. "So first of all, where are your mom and dad?" "Gone." "Did they leave you home alone with the window open?" "Alone. But I opened it myself." "Why would you do that?" "The light's off. It's dark. It's scary. Lights in the window. Flashlights. But the light will come back. That's what to do with your parents. They'd been gone a long time." "Aha. But do you want some water or juice or milk?" "Juice." "Do you have an apple?" Stephen smiled. The apartment John rented was very ordinary, and he did not change anything in it. The modest furnishings had not been renovated for a long time, but in general it was clean and decent. And this young man had recently arrived in the city and could have rented any apartment, but he chose this one because he was lucky, and the apartment was in the building where the right person lived, the person he had long ago sworn to find. Evelyn, who witnessed what had happened, was shocked. Such an event can be discussed for a long time from all sides, and the main thing was that she was the only one who had witnessed it, so she hurried to share it with her best friend, stopping by for a cup of tea. So wait, after listening to the story a second time, because Evelyn loved to repeat herself, she was enlightened by the details of the event. Jenna decided to clarify something. "So what happened in our house? Why didn't you say something before?" "I told you. You should have listened." The old woman was insulted, unwilling to admit the truth. At first, she really did not say where the child was sitting on the window. She was just emotionally functioning with impressions, the baby. That man was taken away by a stranger, and we're sitting here like a fool, drinking tea. So he's not exactly a stranger. He's a neighbor, a decent, well-mannered young man. "Do you know who she is?" "Well, polite," Evelyn said, as if that would be the end of it. "Holds the door. Woman doesn't smoke. Probably a student or a businessman you talk to, and you'll know everything. So let's go to him. What a stranger's kid. He saved me. Well, it's only the parents that get Andy back now." Meanwhile, Camille and Christopher were on their way home. The visit was a little disappointing. It turned out that no job could be offered to Christopher. They promised he would, maybe where such valuable personnel is needed, but it was clear they'd just feed him breakfast. Camille's mood was spoiled by something else. In the guest was a young married couple, peers in the RKK, taking between them and shining love Camille. It was physically unpleasant to look at them. It emphasized the fact that she herself had married purely out of convenience. But how was married life? Robert asked. He was an old friend of Christopher's. Back in high school, they had agreed that they both couldn't stand algebra and had a passion for Dumas. Slowly, what if we really mean it? Look, we've known each other for 100 years. You don't think I can tell? I'm fine, really. Your son's growing up. He looked at Camille, who was helping the lady of the house put the salads on the table. When I saw her, I fell in love with her. Would you believe it? No, I didn't think so. Just looking at me with that age difference. I get it. I added a frown. It was hard to get it out of myself that she got married because I could offer to provide a proper home. And I don't believe it. She's young. Yes, you see everything so beautifully when you're young. Remember when we went to Sicily in 2000? What vineyards of sausage there? And the women. If only we had stayed. Timo shook his head. It was a completely different world. Shook his head Christopher. He who's that distant, seemingly already almost historical past imprinted in his memory not only sultry moment pictures, Mediterranean pastoral. Then he and Robert dashingly rushed to earn money abroad. However, as many believe that already their dreams will come true. And even at first fortune smiled on Robert's specialty. Got him a job at a factory making olive oil. To adjust the work of updated equipment, Christopher was invited to repair masonry wine cellars belonging to a sick man. And as they told the head of the mafia, the one turned out to be not a pathos bloodsucker, but as if a normal man. Salaries he did not delay and even invited to make a table with him, which is forever remembered Christopher. Great cheeses were served. Giovanni Bianchi amazed Christopher with his knowledge of Russian, and told that he learned it for the sake of his first love, beautiful Elizabeth, who was the daughter of the director of a large department store. But the author of the trip with his father met his bursting love, forced the beautiful girl to renounce her own family and enter the house of the groom, trusting him completely. The lavish wedding was played. But on the happiest day, when Giovanni had a son and his beloved died, Christopher also told about his family. His father and grandfather were professors. They were involved in psychology and psychiatry, studying controversial topics such as hypnosis, personality programming on a subconscious level. Christopher disappointed them by refusing to continue the family business. He wanted to work with his hands to create something reliable for centuries, so he chose the craft of masonry. Christopher plunged into memories and does not come out of their public hour, but in some places prickly disturbing fog for a long time, even when we had already said goodbye to everyone and moved back with his wife. Let's go to the zoo as a family, unexpectedly suggested Christopher as we approached the house. It's been a long time since we've been out together. We'll eat ice cream and tease the monkeys. Camille was silent because she pushed with her tongue. Christopher realized that his wife was in a bad mood. It's interesting how the tycoon must have watched cartoons for a year. Again, the man tried to diffuse the atmosphere and looked up. The lights had already been fixed, the windows in the apartment were glowing, and the window was open. Camille exhaled, holding his wife's hand in his. The woman also looked up, startled, forgot how to breathe, and his gaze fell down to the asphalt. The windows are empty, son. They rushed together to the entrance, but almost in the face did not hit the door, from which came out 100 nodding sticks among themselves old ladies. Which ones came back? Then the parents, I lowered myself on them, Evelyn Blood, and turned away, miming with my lips. There's nothing wrong with your child. Hurriedly calmed, sick, and kind of ready to faint parents. Saved. What? What happened? Camille whispered. Where's my son? He bellowed. The old ladies looked at each other. At your neighbor's. He took him off the window. He took him off the window. Did you hear what happened? You interrupted Evelyn. I was walking home to the store. In the morning I noticed that the kefir was expiring. so it would be evaluated. And what do you think? They took the kefir. I had to take it. I need it for my stomach. Oh, you chased Jenna away, realizing the retreat could go on for a very long time. In general, your son neighbor to the right on the balcony went out and saw ours that sits on the windowsill. So he took it down to his place, took it away. Just like that. Christopher silently rushed forward. Camille rushed after him, rather after her son. There you go and thank you nothing, waved her hands Jenna. The door knocked and rang at the same time. John some time ago and the boy puzzle multicolored cube went to open. You had my son, it felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. Which son raised his eyebrows questioningly, not letting him pass the threshold. Stephen, the little boy. Camille's voice trembled. We were told that you saved him. What do you mean? Yes, he stepped back, letting him pass and pointing with his hand into the room. The parents rushed to the child. Stephen was terribly happy to see them, but didn't understand why. Why mom is crying, and dad is not crying, but mumbling something affectionately. I don't know how to thank them. When the first emotion subsided, Christopher turned to John. Thank you. We were told how it was from the street. From the street, a neighbor saw Camille pick up. Thank you. Don't mention it. John brushed it off. What could have been done differently? It's just that I went out on the balcony for a minute and saw a boy sitting on the windowsill. That will never happen again. John smiled at the head of Stephen's arms. Thank you again. And what's your name? John. Thank you. You're a neighborly visitor. We haven't seen you before. I just moved in. Renting. There were more thank yous. Finally, we went into the hallway. A toy. It was Stephen's father's deadline. What toy? Didn't get it. While the boy was here, I let him play, smiled John, holding out a cube. If you don't mind, I can give it to him. I used to play it myself. No, I don't mind, Christopher replied, and thought they were awfully lucky to have a neighbor. When the door closed behind the family, John sighed as he finally had a chance to be himself again. Back in the room, he sat on the floor in the lotus position and began to breathe in a measured manner. He needed to regain his equilibrium and energy balance because today he saw up close the man he had been searching for so long. This man had changed so much, but the eyes he would never forget. If it wasn't for years of training and discipline, he would have barely looked into them and screamed again, returned to the nightmare he had only miraculously survived, would have gotten lost in the madness. John held his breath, as far as he had the strength, and exhaled sharply, as if gluing himself firmly together from the shards that had once shattered this man's entire being. But now, coincidentally, he was one step closer to realizing his plan. How fortunate that the boy had climbed up to the window. Now it would be much easier for him to enter this family the next morning. Camille woke up in a disgusted mood. First of all, she remembered that she had left the child alone, and she felt ashamed. And that was not the kind of person Camille liked to be. Secondly, she knew that the airbag was slowly melting away, and my husband hasn't gotten a job yet. So what to do? They don't starve. Enough at the aunt's place. She's had enough. Of course, there was an option to ask Emily, but my little sister will start lecturing about child rearing, so she'd understand. But I had to go to the store. There for a long time wandered between the shelves, because I forgot the shopping list made the day before yesterday. Good afternoon. A familiar voice sounded, but it seemed even more beautiful today. It was John, too, with a cart, where Camille had a quick eye for fresh pigeon tenderloin, a huge piece of cheese and chocolate. And I felt ashamed of myself. And I felt a little ashamed of myself. With a stocked pasta and soup set of chicken and potatoes, a pack of cheap yogurt for my son. Hello, replied, shifting her gaze to the guy. I wonder how old he is. Even younger than me, pricked the thought, and Camille smiled at the girl and said she had a charming smile. And why did the woman think I got Christopher not like this tall, muscular, with piercing and green eyes, correct facial features, sensual lips? One more look at the hand, no ring. Somebody's lucky to have a son. Poor thing was so frightened, wasn't he? I wondered. Yeah, he's fine, she shrugged. I think he'll quickly forget the bad things. Next to such a wonderful mom, John smiled. But Camille thought that if she were an ice cream maker, she would definitely have Rostic's class lying down. I really feel so bad about leaving him alone. You see, we were called to visit with a baby to go uncomfortable, and there is no one to watch. John nodded, put a set of cakes in the cart. I understand. I was raised by my father alone, and I was often alone. He believed it could raise me to be a man. He seems to have succeeded, Camille replied thoughtfully, noting that John was dressed expensively. Perhaps the watch is not a fake. I wonder what a man is. Forgotten in the apartment, which was difficult to publish because of its deplorable condition. We approached the cash register, and the cashier punched Camille's goods. That'll be $450. The woman put her card to the terminal. It doesn't go through, the cashier said, and added, in a horribly inappropriate way, insufficient funds. Camille at that moment understood very well the meaning of the expression, shame makes you want to fall through the ground. Sorry, wrong card, I guess. Burked nervously from the bag, where there was no other card. The cash was left at home. You'll be there soon. There are people waiting here. Some man in the back of the line was indignant. John held out his hand and put his card to the terminal. Oh, come on. Camille pulled her eyes out. Thank you for your purchase. We look forward to seeing you again. The cashier glanced at John, already punching in his purchases, and then at Camille. She felt like she'd told them the same thing for nothing. Only I'm so embarrassed, and I'll just return the cash I forgot at home, she blushed. So hot her cheeks were. Camille walked out of the store with John. Would I be uncomfortable taking money from a woman for helping out of the goodness of my heart? He grinned, his eyes downcast. The license doesn't cost a trifle. Isn't that heavy? The 4-pound bag of pasta was indeed pulling unpleasantly down. Camille took it just because it was a good discount. They'd be enough for a couple of months. I guess we were just lucky to meet, said as we walked down the little alley, K, which, illuminated by my meager fall sun, shone red leaves like flaps of silk. Every year, for some reason, these trees were the ones that shed their leaves later in the year. How long will you be staying with us? I mean, we didn't think anyone would ever rent that apartment. It's just that there are some old memories of this town and this street. But the present is often so different from what you expect in the past. I think I'll stay here for a couple months, and then go home. Where, pardon me, I'm probably minding my own business. Why is that? It's always good to talk to someone nice. For now, my home is in Austria. But who knows? We walked on in silence. We parted on a landing. Say hello to your son. He's brave and smart beyond his years, John said. Goodbye. Once again, Camille blushed. If it had happened to someone else, she would have shrugged. But it was different with her. Camille was surprised at how John was. The little sister came back and was walking home. Her little sister came upon her. Christopher told me everything. How can you be so irresponsible? Emily waved her hands. Camille rolled her eyes, not hiding how fed up she was with her sister. In fact, at a tender age, she'd adored Emily. Left her tidbits, covered her with the warmest blanket. She used to weed her aunt's vicious garden bed. But later Camille realized that Emily was annoying because she was too free-spirited. By the fact that she had been fed all these years. And she says, how does a princess leave home? Dancing and earning enough to rent an apartment, dressing fancy. But it ended well. Camille tried to fight back by developing purely by accident. I hope you learned your lesson. And look at you. The woman couldn't stand it. For several minutes, the sisters silently glared at each other. Camille gave in first, sighed, and smiled shyly. I'm sorry. I was just worried. Yes, it's awful that it happened that way. We'll change the bolts on the windows. We'll figure something else out. And until Stephen's old enough to make sense, we'll never leave him alone again. So we'll make up, said Emily, who just couldn't stay angry with her sister for long. And the next days went even as if better than expected. But then something happened. One evening, Camille and Christopher left the house again, but this time leaving their son with Emily. Those same relatives agreed to help with the work. And Camille accompanied Christopher as moral support. We also talked to Sam, an acquaintance of theirs in this town. He owned a firm, building cottages, houses. In general, everything in vacancies mason as if it was free. They came back, buoyed with hope. In a couple of days, Christopher could go on a trial order. True, he had to spend a couple of days out of town in a cottage village. But that was a small thing. We let the bus go again, because some drunken guy came asking for more bread. So we had to walk the rest of the way. Nothing. The new housing estate will be built, and we will have more transportation. Christopher encouraged his wife. Camille was not impressed by the prospects and continued to look around fearfully. It was unpleasant for her to walk an extra stop in bad weather through the park, then past some unfinished tour. And then out of a doorless doorway shining with an alarmingly otherworldly darkness came two types, one of them spitting through his teeth. Walking, added the second, and grinned. And the third type appeared was behind the backs of the spouse, blocked the way to retreat. "You, Christopher," screamed frightened Camille, clinging to her husband. "Excuse us, let us pass." "Where are we going?" The first man stepped closer. "We don't know each other." Christopher spoke firmly, but apparently not at all convincingly. "Not for the likes of these guys. Let me through. Otherwise, what am I, Grandpa?" The second man repented and jokingly, but palpably poked Christopher with a fist in the shoulder. "Do you have a problem?" A familiar voice sounded. Camille did not know she could feel such joy. Turning sharply, she saw John under the light of the only street lamp. He seemed to radiate calmness, the calmness of a tiger, capable of destroying any opponent with a single swing of his paw. "And who the hell are you?" Valerius bellowed, the type that stood closer to John, and ridiculously swung his fists and rushed forward. Camille come again with her husband, but hardly forgot about his existence. John literally threw him over himself, then hit the second attacker hard, and the third simply backed away. And then those who were defeated jumped up, and all just ran away. "Thank you." That's all Christopher could manage to get out of himself. And suddenly John staggered backwards and landed on a pole. "John!" Camille exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Are you hurt?" She touched his face lightly, and he lifted his chin, looked into his eyes. Camille felt as if she were falling into the sea, woven from the chaita and the charms of the marsh grass. "Just a scratch," answered, though the eyebrow above her eye was cut short. Apparently, this first one was proving to be a truly dangerous opponent, even for one such as John. "Yes, not so much as," bellowed at the confused spouse. "She's not well." "I'm fine, really, right? I'm not worth your concern." "Camille, I just have a headache, and I'm dizzy." "You may have a concussion," Christopher said, walked over so his neighbor could lean on him. "It'll have to be soon. I think it'll get better soon." "Have you been in a lot of fights like this before?" asked Christopher. Personally, he did not approve of forceful methods of solving issues in any case. My father's a lawyer. John didn't approve of it. But sometimes there are cases when you just cannot pass by. "Let's get this wound cleaned up." Camille gasped. "Put some tea down. Have a drink." Christopher was more than happy to hand over the neighbor to the doctors, because Camille was not even a nurse, but from what happened, his nervous patriarchy. That, however, rode off at age and did not argue. Without adventures reached the apartment of the spouses. "Who is it? What happened?" Met a small company, dumbfounded Emily, our neighbor John, which Stephen saved by putting tea, please, food and first aid kit, curtly said everything she knows Camille needs. "Stephen is asleep, by the way," frowned Emily and went to do as told. Sent first to the bathroom for a dressing down with Camille, and then planted in the kitchen filled with tea and clubs. John was speechless and visibly embarrassed by the attention to his own person. Emily was under the impression of how complicated life turns out to be. 2 miraculous rescues by one neighbor in 1 week, a world record. Perhaps this mysterious neighbor made a double impression on her. Yes, handsome, even too well-mannered intellectual, aged a generation, probably. But there was something about him she didn't like. And yet show with the doctor, said Camille. In farewell, when the neighbor went to his room only because you insist on it, smiled and again met gaze intently, deeply, to the most secret corners of your soul, sweet dreams. And it was surprising. But Camille slept beautifully. She was dreaming some sweet nonsense that young May fools who don't know how unfair the real world is. But not a 30-year-old woman married without love. In this dream, Camille was riding Bigfoot, with a cotton candy dress on her arms and butterflies, with golden wings, singing that dreams can come true. Can you believe we were outside the toy department? Christopher, a couple days later, when he came back from the store he went to with Stephen. And he didn't beg for anything this time at all. He's getting older and realizing that he's done being naughty. If only Christopher had been a little more attentive and Camille hadn't been so immersed in sadness for tons of her everyday life. True, now diluting them with flashes of thoughts of the neighbor coming in as inconsequential. They would have noticed that Stephen had become less interested in all his toys at all, for he now had one and his most favorite, a puzzle cube given by his neighbor. On this day in the evening, John just showed up on their doorstep with a small basket containing exotic fruit, cheese, and chocolates, and said it was just a gesture of thanks for being a first aider. Naturally, he was invited to a tea party. Yay, Uncle John! Exuberantly rejoiced Stephen, jumping after his guest in the kitchen to play with me. Only if you obey your mother, smiled the neighbor. I promise, with the purest of intentions, replied Stephen. Of course you will play, sighed Camille, who was mortified by this picture. Christopher said nothing. It was strange to him. However, there was no time to deal with anxieties, and it turned out to be tedious. It was time to go to work. Christopher packed his things, kissed his wife, stroked his son's head warmly, and said goodbye to Emily, who promised to come and help more often. Well, now tell me what you had in common with him and your sister when your husband was already far away, and he himself was sweetly in his proper day's sleep. What do you mean? The piercing image always frightened Camille a little. And then years ago, she guessed her sister wasn't marrying for love. Well, he's a friend of ours. Shrugged her shoulders at the windowsill. Comes by sometimes. Stephen likes to play with him. That's all. What do you want? Taking less robbed, Camille began to humor the soil in the pot. He's a nice, seemingly poor man, but he's open. And then for some reason she took and laid out to her sister the incident in the store. Emily listened silently, only her eyes grew darker and darker. Fool, he shouted, so that Camille recoiled. She flew out into the hallway, hastily threw on a sheepskin coat, pulled on stiletto boots and rushed away. Immediately, however, there was an insistent knock at the neighboring door. "Hello," answered John, who opened the girl's door. He didn't like the way she looked at the stairs. He could read well, too well. Here Emily abruptly held out some bills to him. "What is this? Paying back a debt? You paid for my sister." "Thank you. Of course you don't have to." John smiled. It was. And that smile, that special smile, worked perfectly. But this maiden with the fury of a gazelle came to Leo. Only her eyes narrowed dangerously in response. "We don't need charity." Eve interrupted. "Will you take it? And if I don't?" Looks like there's a new player in the game. John didn't expect to have any problems with this girl, but he suddenly started to like it. "What do you want? What about you? Why are you meddling in our family?" The door next door is ajar. One of the neighbors was attracted by the loud voices, and I didn't want my sister to overhear any more. Anything can happen. "Come in, we'll talk over coffee." A good chin tuck and squeeze passed her into the apartment. Emily was determined. She wanted to find out from John if he had a woman, why he'd moved in at all, and if his relationship with her sister smelled of flirtation. Except that conversation didn't happen. John parried. He gave such a florid answer to any question that when you tried to understand it, it came out that she herself was a fool and spoke nonsense. But he did tell me something about working as an analyst. Always brought back nostalgia from his childhood. He was charming. He was outspoken. Emily spent 300 hours at his place, and when she came out, she couldn't breathe in the crisp, frosty air. Yeah, her head felt kind of heavy. It felt like she was slipping in a guide, and only now she was waking up. The girl squeezed her eyes shut and winced hard to the point of pain. This is crazy. She'd gone to see him, hadn't she? And how come she'd taken a liking to him? Why does it seem like he's definitely a nice guy, yet it felt so strangely soul-scraping, like something was being put down? But one thing was definitely worth recognizing. John has a stunningly beautiful voice that you want to listen to forever. Maybe that's what sirens would sound like if they were men. His voices are special not only because of the emerald-colored malachite, but because of how catchy they are. It's as if his every word is typed into his brain underneath them. Meanwhile, Christopher arrived at the cottage village of New Lynxes, where he found himself immediately immersed in the already forgotten processes. And then, behind the rumble of work, behind the unsuccessful creation of something that can please more than one generation, he was flooded with memories, and he willingly succumbed to them. So it was easier not to think about the fact that the beloved truth, the most beloved woman in the world to him, cooled, and supposedly an urgent case comes along and slips out of his hands. Camille became more thoughtful, and also went to the hairdressers for something, although before she was content to color her sisters from home. Which, by the way, is very good for the family budget. Lying on his bed one evening, Christopher was suffering from insomnia. It had happened to him before. And then a bell rang from the depths of his memory. What if I tried what had his father and grandfather taught him? Not that they were such masters at fighting insomnia, but there were special techniques for working with the mind. But then Christopher came to his senses and called himself crazy. These aren't toys. And in general, it was better to stay away from all this, as he realized once dearly. With that, Christopher fell asleep, and in his dream he saw shards of the past. Then he was still young, walking through the garden with Don Bianchi, and listening to him. And the Italian was talking about his son being the only heir growing up. It's strange. The boy has nightmares and strange fantasies of running away from home. He believes he lives among some evil sorcerers. Naturally, Giovanni takes him to the doctors, but we don't want to expose the child to their method. Then we talked about Christopher's life, and he bragged that his hypnotist acquaintance even said that he supposedly had a talent. And that's when Giovanni asked Christopher for a delicate favor. He said he didn't want his problems and rumors to spread. The risk is great if he finds a master in such a specific matter in his environment. That's why he needs science, Christopher. And Giovanni also offered a reward so generous that Christopher didn't believe it at first. Much later at home, with this money, buying a car, a foreign car, the latest model, and trying to start a business, Christopher felt uncomfortable. It seemed to him that this money was not good dirty. And the last thing Christopher saw before waking up with a scream that made the other workers jump up in the room allotted to the crew was him. Giovanni led him over to the artificial grotto, where a beagle puppy was playing with a dog near a statue of Mars. "The boy is my son Alberto," Giovanni said. He looked to be about 6 years old, no more. The child was laughing, but how the laughter was cut short when he noticed his father grabbed the puppy by the collar and froze himself like a marble statue. His eyes were a huge green. Meanwhile, at the Christopher house, the changes continued. Camille thought about what she needed and, more importantly, could go out to work. The thing is that while walking with Starapova, she noticed that he did not shun other children. He himself approached the kids and asked to play. And to make sure they accepted him, he offered to share his brand new truck with them, transformed into a spaceship. Another time was in the country. They were in a bakery with Nika. Suddenly, Stephen said he was big and wanted to buy his own pie with jam. "Are you going to go to the salesman's aunt?" his mom asked him, taking some money out of her purse. Aha! After this incident, Camille wanted to cry. Is her son really becoming an ordinary kid? On this day, even with Emily on the wave of her maternal delight, she spoke calmly, without the usual barbs. Her sister, by the way, had a lot to share. After that incident with the return of money, she changed her attitude to John, and he no longer seemed so suspicious. She'd even stopped by to see him. Why? Camille finally saw her, because why did it suddenly become unbearable that John started spending time with Emily? No, he hadn't forgotten about her. She even asked him to fix a shelf in the kitchen. He did it, but still couldn't a sissy all posh and leave her alone. Better at your club. Look for a man, dumped, and through your teeth. What do you want? You're married. And then you've seen those men at the club. They only want one thing. So you like John. She turned sharply to her sister. She sang tensely. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking. Emily shook her head. I don't like anything. It's just that my friends over there even went to the movies. Well, congratulations. Make sure you don't try to shade the pop roots. So we should go. I've got a husband to remember, and I'm gonna make cutlets for him to eat when he gets here, Camille said, and she left so fast that Stephen barely had time to run after his mom. True, took it as a game and was happy. Camille missed her husband, although until a couple of days ago, as if in secret from herself, as if dictated by her darker half, she had even rejoiced at his departure, because it was possible to shake freely. No, she could not say that Christopher was a domestic tyrant by any means. She couldn't even recall an instance where he'd made a single scene of jealousy. A husband was just too bland. But now his rustling was sorely missed in the house. Christopher moved loudly, and his yet infused all sorts of insignificant phrases with which the ordinary family life is filled like a bird's forest. That evening, Camille burned the cutlets, had to throw out a full pan. The doorbell sounded the annoying last straw, and the fact that it was a neighbor at the door made Camille look furious. Good evening. You're me. What's up? I thought you asked to come in. He looked confused. He was so innocent and defenseless now. You said the faucet was leaking. Yes, of course. Come in with that technical nuisance. Camille could have handled it herself. It just needed a little tweak. But the day before Emily told her about the relationship, it turned out to be the perfect excuse to see John. 5 minutes worth of business. She smiled, ducking away from the screen. Are you in a hurry? Bah, not really. If you don't have time to deal with me, then just say so, and I'll beat you to it. I got the look of a delinquent puppy. Just what is it with my sister? With Emily. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you two dating? It was tactless and stupid for a married woman to approach that man. But Camille was carrying on. No, you're right. Emily, your sister, and I have to be completely honest. Yes, she's made it clear more than once that she cares for me. She's an amazing girl, smart, beautiful, generous. I get it. Spit. But I don't think it's gonna work out, because I am. Let's just drop the subject. Okay, the faucet's fixed. It was obvious the guy was in a hurry to leave, but Camille blocked the way, caught his gaze like a shooting star in the palm of her hand, and sank back into it. I can't be with her because I feel something more for another woman. But it's wrong, unacceptable, because she's unfree. She belongs to another. The quiet words fell in Camille's mind like river pebbles into the water that generates diverging circles. There are trusts that must be closed until you decide to open them all. Finished with a strange phrasing that Camille also missed. Well, I gotta go. I'll see you around. She woke up from a semblance of a trance when the door had already closed behind her neighbor. She went back into the kitchen and sat by the window. For a long time, she watched the light from the lanterns being lost in the deepening snowstorm. Winter came, fell unexpectedly on the city. And then she dropped her head on her folded hands and cried. I can't go on like this. Emily plumped down on a leather sofa in a relatively quiet to me for the rhythm of the glowing lights in the corner of the nightclub. One of the dancers pulled her neck, awkwardly doing the cobra dance, and I didn't have to replace her. Hello, an extra shift and a willingness to have a nervous breakdown that even a generous raise wouldn't compensate for. Problem? Asked Rick, sitting down. Here, this 19-year-old programming genius was a regular at the club, because here, as he said himself, a unique atmosphere in which, under the rhythms of Flash, you can qualitatively immerse yourself in work. But it was also here, and you'd find a client who needed something sweet done. Rick was known as a master of protection, valuable to his clients' files from websites from being hacked and stolen. But he was also said to be a hacker craftsman. But this guy himself is out of the blue and perpetually comradely, and has a toothpick between his lips. I deny all speculation. He said there are 1,001 legal ways to solve it. It's all about knowing where and what to look for. This one, raising his hand, Emily twirled it above his head. My whole problem is, why do I get sciatica by the time I'm 30? So go away, where do I get paid like this? And then I'm good at dancing, young Mila. So you use what nature has given you, smart girl. The main thing is not to waste it all. What about my family? What can I take from them? They're not so bad. They're normal. The girl took off her platform sandals and started kneading her feet. But my neighbor doesn't like that ex. He's kind of cloudy and sweet to me. You think he's a bad guy. I can't figure out why. Maybe the bad guy wants what's mine, unless he wants to squeeze me. But I don't think so. I mean, they're not lonely old people. They're people with a lot of acquaintances and stuff. No, it's something else. I just don't know who I'm talking to, but I'm not myself. It's like I'm overheating in the sun and my head's melting. You want me to find out about him? Can I? Are you awake? Emily stopped, shook her finger under Rick's nose without dragging me into her dark business. Just give me his picture and everything you know. I'll see what I can do. Since when do you moonlight as a private investigator? But I consider it a compliment for my muse to go away in a couple days. Christopher was pleased, so much so that he even started humming to himself from time to time. This internship not only came to an end, but also ended so successfully that the bosses immediately offered a new job, and even with good pay. There were, of course, some difficulties associated with it, but she decided that she talked to his wife, and together they will solve everything. Welcome back. Camille hugged him when he was back home. And where did you ask? In general, before with his son always ran out to meet him, and he did not step a step. Needed a lot of attention. He watches cartoons. Dad arrived. The kid came out into the hallway, looked at his father. Well, go to the grandmother. Came Christopher opens his arms for a hug game, which the son adored. Always Mishka will catch you, take you out of town, beyond the rivers. Stephen grimaced and roared loudly. Mommy chase uncle away. You're not my daddy. And he ran back into the room. Marveling, marveled Christopher. Son, Stephen, have you been gone long? He must have forgotten somehow. The little one still shook his head. Camille, he never did. Even when I went to my parents in the country for a month, he came back with a beard. It was last year, remember? He recognized it right away. What's wrong with him? But, fortunately, Stephen in an hour already recognized Papa was lured out from under the table guests, and the family reunited. As it should be. How are you doing without me? Fine. Oh, I don't mean that. Camille was embarrassed, but Christopher had already gotten gloomy. Waiting. Missed you, of course. I mean, we were good. This is where I redecorated a little bit. She pointed to the pendulum wall clock and the new tall. Don't get distracted, okay? We're on a tight budget. I've been offered a job, by the way. I'll only get paid at the end of the construction project. That'll be 4 months from now. I'd like to ask for an advance, of course. But who knows? Speaking of work, I can go out too. Stephen will go to kindergarten like a normal child. She interrupted her husband. And Camille told her husband about the wonderful changes in the baby. From strangers is no longer frightened, more inquisitive, became inquisitive, and just at home capricious stopped. Used to sit for hours and dive into his puzzle. This cube is colored, and silently fiddles with it. And you mean the one that the neighbor gave? Christopher frowned. Camille nodded. He came by. Well, the neighbor does. While you were away to fix some things around the house. But he likes to play with him anyway. You know what's annoying? Suddenly, Christopher slams a cup on a saucer, and it almost breaks. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Stop it, you know. It's not normal. Said in syllables and loud enough for old gossipy Evelyn to hear on the first floor. A strange man comes into my house like he's my own. My son. My son, you see, has grown fond of playing with him. You see. Monitoring. I've had enough of this Brazilian soap opera. I'm not leaving here again. And you know what? That Camille was holding onto a stool. She's got her hand clutched in the city of her robe. As if its cozy softness could have anything to do with a pissed-off husband. I was offered a job with accommodation, 100+ kilometers away. But they'll pay well. People are reliable. They won't cheat. And here I think, I do not want to leave my wife and son alone. Not wanting them, all sorts of neighbors staggered. So you're coming with me. That's it. I call and say I agree about the family. I say the day after tomorrow, kids. But no kids for me. But you're my wife. I'm all yours. I brought you into the world. I've forgotten, so remember. He banged his fist on the table and left the kitchen. Camille froze. In all the years of their marriage, Christopher had never raised his voice to her. This was the first scandal that made her feel small, alone, and betrayed for nothing. Her husband's Camille didn't say anything. She simply silently cleared the table, put her son to bed, and ducked under the covers on the marital bed herself. Christopher read a little before going to bed and turned off the earpiece. Good night. He tossed dryly. Good night. Camille decided that he would never see her lightly again, because someone who suspects a wife who has given up everything in her life for the sake of her family like that is just not deserving. The next day, Camille calmly talked to Christopher, having learned all the details. It turned out that the spouse was entrusted to order the Mountain Lake Sanatorium, which was not an easy sanatorium, but a place where guests were offered health rest of elite class. Not so long ago, they finished the restoration of one of the parts of the building. And now, to give it an exquisite, fenced-in final look was lacking only good masons. In general, the immediate superiors of Christopher did not welcome employees traveling to the place of work with their families. But it turned out that the policy of the owners of Mountain Lake is such that the staff working there for long periods of time at will can settle with their families in small cottages, standing at some distance from the main building. And these were not cottages, not anything but decent houses, comfortable even for families with children. What am I going to do there? Camille grimaced. The same as being a housewife here. Personally, he put a lot of things into the term housewife, including the ability of a woman to keep quiet and obediently follow her husband, who makes important and, of course, correct decisions. There's also something that employees can use the pool, go skiing, there are mountains nearby. I see, Camille replied. And by the look on her face, Christopher, in turn, realized that she would probably comply. But she goes a great many ways to express her displeasure. You think about what you need to take on the road, and pack slowly. Genius idea, Camille, for rustling in the hallway dressed. I'll go to the store on the way. I'll think about it. Thank you, honey, for making up your mind for a stupid woman. What's the whole family gonna do? As Camille stepped out of the driveway, she tilted her head. The thick snow fell, Lebbeusy flakes, saddled on her face, secretly mingle with the tears flowing against her will. How much did she hate her husband at that moment? Would just take him and divorce him. Camille paused. If ever she knew a snowflake caught on her lips a bad rotten thought. Never had such a thing crossed her mind. Ask her who had before about it. She'd explained that she hadn't thought of it, because they had a family. Because in her youth, when it fell to her to take care of her younger sister, because she had no idea how it was even possible to exist, what she called autonomously outside of status. Christopher's wife. He was her pillar of support, the one who solved all her worries. Camille lived a quiet, peaceful life. Of course, sometimes she wanted more passion, something special, romantic, as in the movie show. Yes, and the income would not hurt, so as not to be happy about the points that came to the savings card supermarket basket of delicious and healthy food for the whole family. But she was used to that. There was reality, and there was that other thing, belonging to dreams, as if another Camille. The woman thought about everything and walked slowly, looking under her feet, scraping at the snow beneath her feet. Should I buy new boots? Camille thought. Well, let her be angry. Eva himself said he would make a good living, which means she has the right to go into a fake queue to feel better about herself through shopping. Oops, didn't notice when she ran into a passerby. Foot led, dented, taken in the road overnight to a treacherous crust of ice. And Camille snatched from behind this very passerby, clutched, and they collapsed together into a snowdrift. No mistake. Fences. Camille suddenly realized they were face to face, so that their noses were literally touching. It turned out to be John. He was the one who had been knocked down by a passerby and was now lying underneath her in the snow. I'm sorry, I'm fine. Oh, I'll be right back. Oh, what is it? John aggravation rose and pulled himself up, giving her a hand. The woman started to grow her down jacket. I'm so clumsy, and lost my hat, the neighbor added, handing over the snow-covered headdress. Sorry again, I'm not myself today. There are days when everything is wrong. There was once a rush to the store. It's not an emergency. Would you like to get dry and warm? Yeah, I gotta get home. I like Camille. We'd better have a cup of coffee. Let me make it up to you. I should have looked in front of me. He smiled charmingly. And it seemed to Camille that if she didn't agree to it now, she'd turn into a block of ice. In the cafe, they sat at a table with a view from the window. The receptionist's grandmother kindly pointed out a rack near the heaters where outerwear could be hung instead of a closet. Drinks were served, more pastries for her and a salad for him. More unexpected than ever, she asked about the one that Camille right now would be glad to forget. Let's just say getting serious amnesia. What do you mean? I'm probably being horrible, not tactful, but we haven't seen each other in almost a week. We just had a fight and broke up. There was nothing between us, and now there's nothing at all. Oh, I'm sorry, Camille said. But the news is a bit of a sunshine. I saw her yesterday too, and she brought some stuff, some leaf lettuce to grow on the windowsill for vitamins. She didn't say anything about you, but she looked fine. And we met, and our eyes met. He reached forward and covered her hand with his. What's bothering you? You can trust me. And Camille confided in him about her husband finding a job, how they had a fight, and how it didn't hurt. Apparently, I'm going to have to go away for a few months. Sometimes you have to resign yourself to fate, John said thoughtfully. Do you really think so? With the indignant hope of a negative answer. Camille asked, who knows? Sometimes you have to do what you want to do and just see where it takes you. As for your husband's decision, I wouldn't want to ruin the strong, loving loyalty of a family of mutual understanding, trust, and love. So I'm stepping aside, but I'm sticking around. After that, we talked some more on neutral topics and finally parted on the way home. Camille did go into the store and returned from the doorstep for the territory. The story that she was sold expired sausage, that's why while she was arguing, returned the goods, exchanged for fresh ones, wrote complaints. That's why she was delayed. Christopher was already packing and listened to his wife without much interest. He was not in the mood at all while talking to Camille, but he was sure that being away from the usual daily routine, and especially away from the neighbor, all this will definitely benefit her, and she will become his well-acquainted, Olenka and affectionate, quiet and grateful for all he had done for her. Returning to his room, John stood under a hot shower for an hour. And then though the house and worked perfectly. The batteries. Tried to warm up with chills. Put on 2 sweaters over a warm house suit. Turned out all the lights in the apartment. The guy left only the little dachshund on and climbed into a chair with his feet. Came up closer to the face of the little picture, so that the picture of the portrait of the little dog became clear and at the same time, as began to blur. That snapshot helped him pull himself together in the most difficult of times. He didn't think it would turn out this way. This was not what he had been preparing for over the years at all, and it was both frightening and infuriating at the same time. John couldn't afford to deviate from the plan, and at the same time he couldn't help but feel that he was making a terrible mistake. That this was all wrong, and even what this man had done, that it wasn't worth the punishment prepared for him, because it will affect not only the one who ruined his life a long time ago, but also innocent people. At the appointed time, the couple went to the train station. They decided to take the intercity bus, although Camille would have preferred to take the train. But Christopher said that the train was bad for his neck, and Camille pretended she didn't care. But she also thought about the fact that with such an age difference, and what awaits her in 10 or 15 years in the course of this war, will be quite a grandfather. Mentally, he gave himself a kind of slap for such disrespectful thoughts to his spouse. Camille took her son by the hand, and they walked a little around the station, bought hot chocolate at a kiosk Health, and Hibernation Fox. In it they bought a bun and painted pigeons. What did the janitor with a broom scold them for? In general, before the departure of the bus had fun. In its warm interior, Camille just leaned back comfortably on the back of the seat and watched the city. All ideas are replaced by the outskirts, where more and more dominated by snow, bad weather. And soon she dozed off. In the sanatorium, Mountain Lake occupied decent territories, and if one climbed to the height of bird's flight, one would think that it was the work of giants playing. Had swept away with the palms of their hands a part of their military forest, but put a doll's house on the spot. And a little farther up the mountain Faith stretched threads and hung on them from a box of walnuts. That's how fragile, miniature from the height looked. Located at the ski slopes elevators for lazy and tired vacationers. "Mom, are you a palace?" asked Stephen, pointing with his pen at the huge sanatorium, which against the background of small one-story houses of the staff and really seemed like a palace. "Aha," Camille replied. She suddenly remembered that she and her husband had not been on vacation since the birth of their son. That carefree feeling of absolute relaxation. Now it seemed as wonderful and unattainable as the possibility of flying to Mars. And we're going to a ball there. Oh, don't talk nonsense. He wrinkled his nose, thinking that he would rather play the role of Cinderella here. It was a friend of her husband, could not humanly, trusting to leave in the city. Another woman with such a simple filly would have taken a chance long ago. She'd have had a lover, or even none, to make her happy, as long as she was young and good-looking. She thankfully kept herself in front of Christopher. And then, lo and behold, he began to bury her slowly. The woman's mood improved a little when she looked at the provided residence. It turned out that the cabin was freshly renovated. There were all the necessary household appliances. No frills, of course, but it was possible to live very well. On the day of arrival, we sorted things out, found out what and where. We also looked in the store working here for locals from staff to guests. And finally, we all had dinner together. And that's a sin. Relaxing. After the road, Camille thought that everything was not so bad, and she thought so until the next day, when together with Christopher, she went to the administration office of the sanatorium. Her husband wanted to clarify something about his work. As the appointed foreman, a solid and decisive person, she was just keeping him company, and at the same time decided to give herself a mini excursion. And suddenly, on one of the paths flying what was to be in the spring and summer, an assortment of flower beds. They met John, and "What are you doing here?" without hello, and extremely rudely asked him Eve, breathing fresh air and marveling at the purity of the suburban snow, replied mockingly, raising an eyebrow. No, no, I'm serious. What are you doing here? Relaxing. Are you? No, no, that's impossible. Are you stalking our family? Why? Interested. You tell me. Honey, don't. Camille tried to calm her husband down. Sorry, turned to her neighbor. We just didn't expect to see you here. My husband and my family came to work, and we're with our ponytail. Small world. John shrugged. Well, congratulations. This is a really great place. Why wouldn't you come here? See you later, said, and headed away shamelessly. But the impression he got was one of equanimity. Camille quickly settled into her new place, and she even liked it. Right above the kitchen sink was a window with a view of groves of blue spruce trees, so fiddling with dirty dishes passed under contemplation. The peacefulness of the landscape of the sun noticeably improved appetite, which was not surprising. With the child being able to spend much more time outdoors here than in the city, and the air was really clean, it seemed to have so much oxygen and forest flavor in it that it made you dizzy. True, sometimes my son would persistently start asking where Aunt John was. They were playing so well. Uncle John is funny. He can throw high in the air in his arms and catch it back. Camille answered that Uncle John stayed in town. He had business there. She knew that if she gave her son John's presents away, he would not leave her alone. And even her husband seemed to have calmed down. He immersed himself in his work as if he were younger. When he had a whole team of masons at his disposal, together with whom they gave over the new restaurant saloon, where, according to the owners of Mountain Lake, was to be a real hearth in the manner of the medieval, to roast meat on a spit right in front of the guests. In one of the clear evenings, when it seemed in the transparent sky spilled liquid amber along the horizon, Camille was strolling along the territory of the sanatorium, and suddenly, still from afar, noticed John turn to Flood hurriedly back. She lifted the hood of her down jacket, hoping that she would not notice or recognize him. Camille, having noticed, turned around, and in her gaze read a plea to leave. Please, please, Ostap. I refrain from the temptation to betray my husband. When I'm with you, the man was relentless. Are you avoiding me? No. Then why aren't we seeing each other? You said it was wrong. Isn't ordinary friendship forbidden? Is that enough for you? Am I? I exhaled a shuddering cloud of vapor and turned away to avoid looking into eyes that were as enchanting as forest lakes. It's enough for me, but we can at least try somehow. It's okay. We've made peace. And while Paradise, not without pleasure, took him under the arm and went together to the main out of the sanatorium building. And you were in the winter garden. Camille shook his head negatively. In the movie theaters, went to the scene in the ice town to go sledding. Camille, did your husband lock you out of the house? No. Why just a lot of business from Zenit. The woman tried to defend herself, but it came out insecurely as it is not up to it. I don't feel like it. That's not good. So not far to depression. But it thoughtfully looked forward and suddenly turned sideways, dragged and resolutely behind him. We'll fix that. You see me somewhere. I'll show you one unusual place. You're gonna love it. Actually, it's not open yet, but soon it'll be the best choice for those who miss true romance. They entered the building and found themselves in an empty lobby. John and Camille walked to one of the doors and opened it. The man gestured for his companion to enter, flicking the switch. Camille gasped. They found themselves in a hall reminiscent of those seen in historical movies. This is where they would hold dance parties. So beautiful. Camille ran her fingertips over the tires of the white grand piano on the small stage. Do you like it? Very much. But are we allowed to be here? The woman walked on, listening to the seemingly melodious tapping of her heels. She took off her down jacket and put it on the table. The room was a little hot. Why not? The man approached her with a kind of predatory grace, her heart hammering sweetly with absorbent cotton. Anxious as if to find herself. I'll cross the hive. There are bees in it, and they can fry. But it also has honey. Does it taste of risk? At times, without exacerbating the experience. She didn't notice as he walked by, lightly pressing a button on some equipment, and soft music flowed from the tall speakers. The sounds of the blues floated in the air, and they seemed to push her into John's arms as he gently embraced her around the waist and took her hand and led her in a dance. "You're so beautiful." Camille forgot how to breathe. Every breath felt like a miracle. All she could see were his eyes. "Are you happy?" She couldn't speak. She shook her head, unable to answer precisely and tell a truth she didn't know. "You are the mother of a wonderful child. But are you worthy of the man you've thought of as your husband all these years?" "What do you mean?" "My time is running out. I must go home. Go far away and never come back. But I met you. Can you stay?" "No, but you can come with me. I knew. Stephen, family together forever. Trust, loyalty, affluence, romance, caring." John spoke of what was absolutely, unquestionably important and necessary. For Camille, every word struck her mind with lightning, and she tried it on for herself and this man. Surely, yet gently leading her in a dance to the magic of the blues. She wasn't thinking of Christopher now. She remembered that she had a husband, a father, and a child. But could she ever think of all that in relation to him? Also foolish. A warm flower blossomed in her heart out of anticipation of happiness. Camille smiled, imagining her and her son, John, resting somewhere on the beach under the palm trees, and Stephen calls him Daddy, and they are immensely happy. A real family. "Wouldn't you agree?" John asked. And suddenly his gaze changed to the more abrupt Lord's. "You agree? We leave together and forever." Perhaps say the last words for a few moments. Later, they would have had the effect he longed for, but something suddenly seemed to bring Camille out of the complacency of a lazy trance. Almost a flight, when dreams and reality are so closely intertwined that one can do anything to realize dreams. "I haven't decided yet," she replied. "John, I'm in the dance too fast, my legs are tired." He squeezed her hand too tightly. "John, look eye to eye, as if not my orders. Look, listen, and obey." John let go, stopped, and he rekindled the embrace. "This is wrong." Camille slowly pulled away from him, touching the day. It seemed to her that in the man's gaze now, there was not an ounce of love, but something else. Hate is impossible. It's the sun that sends the glare, only. "No need to go. Stephen and the other kids at the playground. It's time for dinner." "Excuse me, I need to think." "No, I'm sorry. I ran out of the dance hall, picking up my down jacket on the run, throwing it on outside." Christopher. It seemed to Camille that nothing she had ever wished for so passionately as for her husband to be at home now, and not to be late at work, where something had to be solved urgently, because the schedule of tasks was already being fulfilled somewhat on the wrong track. What was the fault of the suppliers of low-quality materials? So everyone waited for new ones to be ordered. "Camille, what's wrong?" "My husband was at home, looking out of the kitchen, looking rather unusual. He was holding a bowl of dough, and we're having apple pie. We wanted to surprise you, didn't we?" He smiled. He patted Stephen's temple, who also hurried to show himself to his mother. "Look, what apples, Ma? And where have you been?" "Out for a walk." Camille replied absent-mindedly. "Walking, looking around. Too bad it's not summer. What's wrong with winter? You can make a snowman and go skiing. Son, go wash the apples for the pie." "And I can." I round my eyes Stephen, for whom not being close to the sink was the ultimate fun. "You know, I think I overreacted to John. He just came into our family's life so unexpectedly." Sigh. Okay, I admit I was jealous as a fool. You see, here he is too. Yeah, it's not pretty, but I'll make it up to you, I promise." Camille was about to say she didn't blame her husband. And in general, she personally decided that John is completely unnecessary persona for them, even though he saved his son. But then her husband said something that shocked the woman. "Anyway, I had a man-to-man talk with him. We decided that there should be no stupid feud between us. He laughed at what I told him about jealousy. Imagine, he's already got someone else. He said it was secret, an affair, but it'll be out soon. Camille thought Pavel's heart was fine. Could her strong John have said that? But it's disgusting, despicable. So we decided to cement our friendship. Tomorrow we'll go snowmobiling. We'll go as a company. Everyone who works here decided to get some exercise. Right. But I'm joining in. So did John. No. Why not? You said yourself at the beginning that I could be more polite, and Christopher frowned understandingly. It's just that you have tomorrow off, Camille said hurriedly. The reason her husband should have canceled an outing that she found suspicious. What seemed odd? Wrong. We were supposed to go snowballing as a family, but we can do that after lunch. Christopher waved goodbye. Well, let's go bake a pie, wife. Without your instructions, I'm sure I'll end up with breadcrumbs. Or raw dough. The next morning, Camille hurriedly looked out the window, but the sun was shining, and the horizon was covered with low clouds. The weather was perfect for a walk. She didn't know what else to say to dissuade him. There was no way to talk to John to find out what he wanted to accomplish with all of this, and what he even thought about his rejection. Waved goodbye for now. Stephen, when Christopher and John were on their way to the group of men in the crowd near the semi-darkness already on snowmobiles, after seeing them off, Camille decided that perhaps she was exaggerating. Maybe they'd just talk, figure things out, and everything would be all right. John would just be a friend. Naive. Maybe. But I'm sure there's a place for that kind of thing in life. The weather turned so quickly. Here it was not the natural forces of nature, but someone had deliberately driven the sky above the forest. Where people went, all the insatiable clouds and winds from many kilometers around. The snow just piled up, but also about the wind gusts circled, its blindness confounding the lace. Do not stand. Keep in line, shouted Joe, the most experienced of the group, who lived in Mountain Lake almost all year round at the post of chief of the place guard. Here, the death would get confused and make a move. The way back amidst the blizzard that had broken up was going to take twice as long at least. So everyone obediently moved on Joe for fear of getting lost in the woods. Christopher Snowmobile sat down for the first time. He hadn't handled it badly in good weather. But now it seemed to him that a moralistic and angry horse was thrashing beneath him. He saw in front of him only vague spots of John, who was riding ahead and was thus second from the tail of the chain. Suddenly, the snowmobile motor on Christopher stalled. He yanked everything he could, but nothing helped. I'm not going, screamed a voice drowned in the howling storm. John slowed down and turned around. The man he'd been looking for so long was walking into his arms, tracked him down yesterday morning and offered him a friendship. It was unexpected. And though the man's hatred for whom John had betrayed all these years no longer had power over him, simply could not have power over him, he felt strange, as if he were half a step away from doing something horribly irreparable, and something inside forgotten and muffled by the vestiges of the marshal's suffering. Don't do it. That Camille had refused was unpleasant to him, humiliating to his ego, but did not at all destroy the plans. It just made it more difficult. More time was needed, and this trip could change a lot of things. But right now, John watched a tiny human figure waving in the distance, and a genuine darkness rose in his heart. Once again, chance was doing him good. He did not touch Christopher's snowmobile. Something in it had broken on its own. It doesn't cost anything. Now just pedal and drive off after the others will throw their Christopher has a chance that his snowmobile really broke down. And that's when John felt hot, dizzy. It was as if nature itself had become his ally together. No one's going to get enough of this man just yet, and then it might be too late. The decision had to be made quickly, but something was in the way. John suddenly realized with horror that he felt a sense of pity. Yes, there was a monster in front of him, a monster from long ago. But why was it so vile to imagine that by his treachery the little boy would lose his father? What would Christopher's wife grieve? Breaking free, John turned the snowmobile abruptly and steered it toward the elders. What's wrong? shouted out in a bore. "It won't start." Nodding, John tried to inspect the snowmobile. "It's bad. Come on, get on behind me. We have to hurry. The visibility is getting worse." Christopher obeyed without a second thought, but the moment was lost. The companions ahead dissolved into the snowmelt. The road, the stacked string of snowmobiles, was rapidly coming to a standstill. Suddenly, the wind rushed at the forest with great force, and an old pine tree, whose roots had long ago poked out of the ground when its giant crooked paws crumbled with a creak, nearly perished beneath it and nearly struck its branches. Abruptly it stalled. The men realized that moving forward was impossible. There remained an option to try to go around in a wide arc. But the weather, it seemed that fate itself was determined against both the Avenger and his as yet unsuspecting victim. The snowmobile was traveling along the edge of the ravine, along a narrow strip free of bushes. Suddenly, the strip of snow shuddered and dragged it down behind him. The forest swallowed up the two men with a shriek. Waking up, John led his hands around the emptiness, so not the whole group, and only then opened his eyes. Everything was dancing in front of him. He bumped his head a little. In addition, the blizzard had not subsided. Because he froze, he realized that he lay unconscious for a quarter of an hour at least. Christopher called out, looking around, noticing a dark patch of clothing nearby. Rushed to him, turned him on his back, felt for a pulse, the lying man quietly for the country. Where does anything hurt?" My leg hurts." "Get up, I'll help you." "Can't lie down, can't sleep." Raised upright in the bathtub and supported him. John made it to the snowmobile. They were lucky because they threw him off it before he landed, and unlucky in that the transport flew nose first into a huge boulder. One look was enough to know that it wasn't going to go any further. "We're going to die," whispered him. "No," said John. It was disgusting. Everyone was moving against him. "Let me breathe. Dream on. Let's go." Suddenly, John saw something up ahead. "Come on." After only a short distance, the men found themselves at a small house. It was put up a long time ago and had no owner. It was for anyone who needed a dry and warm shelter in the woods, and this hut continued to be used sometimes by hunters from neighboring villages and sometimes by tourists. That's why dry firewood, matches, lockers, breadcrumbs, groats, and canned food were found in it. Georgia was shocked by what had happened. John hurriedly started a fire. Now, at least they wouldn't be exposed to the cold. When the storm subsided, you could just walk back. And besides, they'll probably be looking for them soon. "Thank you. You saved me. You saved my son." Now here I am thanking him. John looked at him carefully and then burst into hysterical laughter as he continued to laugh. The man slammed his fists on the wall several times. Yes, so much so that he was staggering to the rescue. "It would have been better if you had died in this forest. Who put me up to dragging you, rescuing you? You? What do I hate about you?" He finished with a sharply lowered voice, already vital. At the same time, threateningly, the last phrase sounded that Christopher became very frightened. "Why? What did I do to you?" A blizzard was beating behind the walls. A tire fire hung in the stove. But now it was no longer cozy and peaceful. There was no sense of security. "Why did I save you? You should have gone ahead. You wouldn't have gotten out. What did you do, man? You don't remember. Sure, you just did your job and got paid handsomely for it. And how did that money make you happy? Yes, I see it did. Your kid got married. What was it like for me then? Didn't you think?" John didn't come closer, didn't move, and stood opposite, and said Christopher didn't understand what was happening. But he also felt like he was about to see John standing there. "I don't know what you mean, John. We can just talk." "We can." The man sat down on the floor of the wall and spoke, and what he had said about Givolo, for Christopher had forgotten long ago, as a nightmare seemed to have been born. Giovanni had said that through hypnosis, Christopher should reprogram Albert's personality, rid him of his obsessive, unrealistic ideas. To make him more obedient was not a fad, but a concern for the child. For otherwise what future? What problems? His what? Christopher at first hesitated, but the day after the meeting in Greece, Giovanni brought his son, and he looked as if into the void, said that he wanted to undergo a hypnosis session himself. Giovanni had coordinated with Christopher many details about what meaning he should lay of the hypnosis session. It was strange and frightening. Christopher had only tried something like this on adult volunteers before, and then sort of casually, not really believing in it. But now there was a child in front of him, a little boy who looked obediently into his eyes, and the pendulum listened to the report and fell asleep. And while he slept, folding his arms across his chest, Christopher would tell him what he must accept in his life. He had 6 or 8 sessions in all, after which Giovanni handed him the money, thanking him warmly. Left the Bathalonia with a light heart, because before the last session Alberto suddenly spoke and told him just a few words. "You're going to break me, and I'll never forgive you for that. My father is lying." "So you're Alberto," whispered Christopher. The hut felt warm. "It's even hotter. Now you want to hear the truth?" With a smirk, asked the man across the hall. Christopher shook his head negatively. He didn't know what to say and was afraid of what he might hear. If you had been more interested in your client, you would have found out that he was really a mob boss, but you didn't want to find out something that might shake your faith that you were doing the right thing. "Do you know how many lives he's taken?" And they called him the Black Demon. He was a scary man. John continued the story. Turns out his mother fell in love with a passionate Italian man, not realizing who he was. She thought he was just a businessman. She just couldn't walk away from him. Giovanni wanted to raise his son to be his copy, but the boy did not accept his cruel world, and moreover, once witnessed how his father punishes his enemies. And then he also learned that his father was a member of a mystical order. Giovanni once took Alberto to a meeting, but what he saw did not make him obedient, but only made him even more horrified. So his father decided to resort to hypnosis. He did not trust local specialists, and so the appearance of Christopher Mann from afar was a stroke of luck, especially since his father and grandfather were major figures in his not-so-successful craft. Alberto wouldn't have gone into hypnosis willingly, but Giovanni knew how to persuade people. He said he'd take the dog away, that the animal would suffer, not his son's obedience. And you know what? He took it away anyway. No, the dangerous one died. He was placed on a remote farm. Dad said pet attachment was a weakness, and I shouldn't have any. When my father was gone, it was fortunate. And it happened, luckily, very soon. I got my dog, and we were together for many days. John told of another thing, that he had given up his father's trade. With great difficulty, he managed to make out what money in his father's business was clean. They were retained by her. But to become himself again, he had to go a long way. In an effort to heal, he began to study the psychology of hypnosis himself. And while he was making progress, it was also getting worse. Do you know how many years I lay in clinics in France and Switzerland? All those brains were powerless. Until one day one of them said I needed to face my past. But I don't think he meant what I chose to do. But I suddenly realized, what do I need and what do you need? I asked him. He was no longer afraid for himself, for his wife and son, and decided that I would find you closer and destroy it from him, destroying everything you hold dear. And it was easy to start. John blatantly revealed his plans to become a family friend, then seduce Camille and force her into a divorce, help take his son, take him far away, and there abandon him alone, leaving Christopher with a broken heart. And that attack on the street was staged so John could appear as a hero. But knowing that your wife, no matter what I do, she loves you. Lucky you. You know, what's worse? I thought I was gonna throw myself at you the second I saw you, but I refrained. And then when I found out, what? Are you happy? I started thinking that if I did all that, how I'd be better than you. You destroyed me on the spot, and you're gonna help me be the same. Meanwhile, the storm had subsided, the wind had dispersed the clouds of snow, and disappeared under the sun. For a while, the men were silent. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Christopher said. It was his turn to speak. He said that there was really no bringing back the past, that what had been done had tormented him for years, and no, that money didn't bring happiness. The business went bust, and the car was totaled in an accident. He was young and didn't see the true nature of things. He realized what he'd done, especially acutely when his son was born. He couldn't imagine anyone doing that to his boy. It was a long, hard conversation. People who met long ago now were opening their souls to each other. They had no secrets from each other. John felt that for the first time, he could be so frankly unafraid to show his real self. Christopher, on the other hand, confided in him more than best friends, told him how he had married. First divorce. They didn't see eye to eye. How you met Camille and believed you'd grow old with her. "What are you gonna do now?" I asked Christopher, when the last words of the revelation came out, and they were silent for a while. "Admit defeat. Defeat. But you won," exclaimed Christopher. "How I could not avenge myself. You said yourself a moment ago that there was less hatred in you now that you recognize my family. How did you say it's like a fire dying out in the rain? I'm trying to feed it to keep it alive again, because it's kept me going all this time, because I've decided to stay me, to spite my father and you. But I can't help that. Forgiving myself and not knowing what to do next. To live," Christopher said. Once again, he and John met gazes. The brown eyes, the tired eyes of an older man already hard to not old, and the green eyes of a young man whose reality for the first time in many years was clear from the sea was. "How old are you? It's all ahead of you. You're the one who said you had money. You can go anywhere, get married, start a family. Aren't people like me entitled?" It was a sincere question John wanted an answer to. "I don't have it easy myself, but I think you're the one who most needs to just find people to be there for them. Sure, it won't always be easy, but that's life. Hey, anybody alive?" Suddenly, the cabin rumbled. Did they really find the missing? No sooner had the disturbing news traveled around the sanitariums than Christopher and John returned. Camille ran to the car, feeling the ground beneath her feet. More news that Borgia had thrown up 2 of them, a man from the company that had come to the woods. She spoke to Emily, who got the information from her programmer detective, and informed her sister that John is not who he says he is. Rick turns out he is a broker and businessman who was not born in this town at all, although his mother was from this country. It also turned out that Rick was a strange guy. It felt like he was wandering the world, never staying anywhere. For a long time, Rick knew that John was deliberately gathering information about his sister Emily, about the whole family. Camille hugged her husband tightly. "Christopher, there's something to talk about." She nodded to the real John nearby. "You know, I need to talk to you too," said Christopher. John called out to his wife's dismay. I think it's time to reveal things as they are. Looked carefully at his wife. "And there you decide for yourself, sweetheart, how to treat me." Stephen was sent for a walk in the yard for the duration of the conversation. Camille made tea, but no one would touch it. She couldn't believe that the story was the plot of some thriller about her husband's past. It was scary, unimaginable, but there was still the present, in which Christopher received forgiveness, which could no longer hope for another man. As I wanted to believe, finally threw off the weight of hatred from his soul, let go of the past, and could move on. And Camille also realized that she didn't really love John at all. It was a crush. It was reinforced by some kind of hypnosis. Naturally, the woman was hurt, but in the face of the fact that her husband was saved, it's despicable. "The main thing is that everything is clear. I have to go," said John, rising. "And to where?" Camille asked. "I don't know, somewhere where I can be alone. Australia and India, maybe. I haven't decided yet." "May I?" he asked gently. "You will convey my apologies to Emily. I don't think she'll forgive me, but I will anyway." Camille nodded. She also took a notebook and wrote quickly. "Here's her phone number. She won't change it. I think it brings her luck." John looked surprised at the note, took Christopher, suddenly went out into the yard, and in about 10 minutes returned with Stephen. The boy, to whom his father was quietly explaining something, had a sad look on his face. "Uncle John, you are going away. When will you be back?" John was confused. He didn't dare ask permission to say goodbye to the child he had grown attached to. What he applied to Stephen, his skills, was never out of malice. He just somehow immediately sensed the boy's problems and slowly began to correct them. Saying the right words slowly made him more courageous, getting rid of his reticence and indecisiveness. "I don't know myself for sure, I won't forget." Stroked Stephen on the head when Stephen finally left. Christopher and Camille sat in silence for a long time. The short winter day soon slipped toward sunset. A message came from John that he had left for India, and he was already at the airport. Yes, that's how life had turned out, she sighed. Why did I give him Emily's phone number? What about now that it's all cleared up? I mean, he's not a bad guy. She should stop clubbing. Let her get her own life together. You can't be serious, honey. Who knows? At least I did what I thought I did. Camille was right. When the new day came, a really clear, cloudless, crystal clear, frosty day, in which the snowbirds and Christopher, Camille and Stephen, were spread out on the branches around the sanatorium. For the first time in many months, they all felt happy together. It was as if they had turned over a new leaf in their lives. Far away, in hot India, green eyes. The man stood on the balcony and looked out over the jungle. He had a lot to think about. He was truly free for the first time. He also remembered seeing a beagle puppy in a store window nearby. Smiling, John walked resolutely out of the hotel. It was time to get a loyal friend, 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 a loyal friend.
Lisa Lewin loved musicals. No, not the ones that directors were now stamping out, as if trying to plug plot holes with songs. She loved the Broadway masterpieces Cats, Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, West, Soviet History, My Fair Lady. Oh, how good they were. Lisa had watched them as a child and tears came to her eyes. She decided that she too would shine on stage. She would become an actress in such a musical, and her songs would touch people's hearts, making them laugh and cry. The childhood fantasy did not remain a dream. Lisa moved towards her goal, supported by her mom. At first, Lisa went to a private eminent vocal teacher. The girl was talented and did not waste her parents' money and the teacher's time in vain. Later, Lisa graduated from the Moscow Conservatory in pop singing. By this time, the young woman perfectly sang both classics and pop songs. She did not give up the idea of getting into a musical. The American production of Chicago was the one that impressed her the most. This musical was based on the true story of two celebrities. Ambitious, risk-taking girls went to trial, but were acquitted, which gave a boost to the beginning of their careers. Lisa more than once imagined herself as a beautiful heroine, then Roxy Hart, then Willa Kelly. The woman even learned all the songs from there by heart. That she dreams of playing a prisoner, knew only one person in this world, which Lisa once trusted. I remember he even said she looked like Roxy Hart with her blonde curls, blue naive eyes, and a bull's eye counter. And so years later, Lisa was reminded of her dream again, only already in an ironic way. It's true what they say about being afraid of your dreams. For now, Lisa was in the main location of the musical Chicago in prison, only she didn't want to sing and dance. She wanted to cry nonstop. For a whole month that she was in the cell, the woman did not stop shedding tears into the pillow, unable to cope with the emotions that choked her at night. And what frightened the fragile blonde most of all was not the place she found herself in, but the fact that she was accused of something she had not done. Only no one in the world believed her. Now Lisa Lewin, nicknamed Candle by the local prisoners, stood in line for a meager breakfast. She already knew that she would limit herself to a slice of bread and butter, drinking tea without sugar. After all, the smell of oatmeal, which the cooks had managed to water down again, making it unsuitable for her stomach, was wafting throughout the dining room. Lisa knew in her mind that she needed to eat. She had lost 5 pounds in a month, and she was not particularly fat, having lost weight on the food here. As her neighbor Miranda Ogoniak, whose bunks were at the bottom, used to say. However, she had no appetite, and the presented dishes killed it altogether. "Make way in primary," muttered the blatant arrestee. Recognized by the local queen nicknamed Countess Camille, in addition to the beautiful tone pushed Lisa hard with her shoulder. She couldn't stand her left face, and the fact that the girl was from a good, even wealthy family. Lisa lowered her eyelashes and silently shunned, not intending to engage in a dialogue and come to an inevitable conflict, from which the loser will come out, taking her portion of gray, mush smeared on the plate. Lisa sat down in her seat, her cellmate sitting next to her, a former teacher already of Nancy's age. They called her Aunt Nancy or Mama Nancy and treated her with love. Opposite settled two girlfriends, the same Miranda Ogoniek, a sportswoman with a haircut under the boy, and next to a young Shaitan, who became a term for the fact that interrupted walking on the side of Mujenko. The first days in the zone were given to Lou and Lisa with great difficulty. She remembered how it all began with the search, which was a total humiliation for her. The wardens did not demand nudity. They searched her hair, her mouth, made her bend over. Then the quarantine area. It was cold there, so we slept in beds 2 at a time. There was steam coming out of your mouth. The walls were scrolled with mats and prayers mixed in. Then prison began. Lisa was lucky to have a cell. The roommates were nice, though strange. At first Lisa thought she would go crazy in captivity, however one gets used to it. Here Lisa began to get used to the schedule, to the shouts of rising, to the local smells in the industrial rooms with barely warm water. Except that she still hated Thursday, which was known here as Naked Day. Then the door to the cell swung open, spreading all the shouting of the invigilator with "stripping all out, ladies." In this way the administration checked if the prisoners had no marks from beatings, stains, infections, or fresh ones. Narcologist. Lisa was very helpful to Nancy. Lisa understood why she was fondly called Mom. The teacher treated the new girl like a daughter. The first night, as Lisa tried to muffle her sobs and sobbing with a pillow, Nancy got up from her seat and sat next to her. Lisa froze and then felt the older woman's hand touch her hair. She began to stroke her and softly sang a lullaby. To her voice, Lisa fell asleep. Later, Nancy taught Lisa the ins and outs of local life and the laws of the prison. Jenka joked that Nancy had been retrained from a schoolteacher to a guidance counselor. Nancy's aunt taught her that you should ask your relatives from prison for cigarettes in blocks. "I don't smoke at all," she was confused at the time. "You're doing the right thing. There's enough to ruin your health here." "But cigarettes in the zone are analogous to currency," explained Nancy. Jenka went further and for some reason told her cellmate something new. A few ways to make a shiv. I do not advise to use it, but for peace of mind means of protection should have. Only for the master should be better hidden. I mean, Oganik told it with inspiration, or they'll start a search. If they find something, the extra will be sent to solitary confinement. You can take a dip in the local suite there. I was only there for 3 days, we bit all our nails. And if the shift falls on Efremova, you'll forget. She likes to mock the wrongdoer. She says that's how she corrects us. She can strip us down to our underwear, pour water on us, and make us sleep on the bare, icy floor. From Joanna, Lisa also learned various words such as Shaheen Mar, chatter, kippish. All in all, Lisa's vocabulary had unwittingly been enriched. The main advice from the woman in the cell, however, was to stay out of the way. They meant Miranda, although they didn't like her themselves. Now Miranda stretched her neck and tried to see who was making breakfast. I knew it. "Oh shit," the woman said. Shoving a spoonful of porridge into herself, wrinkling her nose, stopped. Eating. "If you can't cook, then stay out of the kitchen. People have no conscience to feed slop. She can even spoil the water." Usually Lisa did not enter into conversation with her cellmates, immersed in her own thoughts. But today, however, she looked up from the bread, which she methodically decided instead of eating. "How does one get into the kitchen there?" she inquired. "Through connections, of course. I got my place in the kitchen thanks to the Countess's patronage." Miranda lowered her voice and nodded at another table. "Now our queen has her people everywhere, so she gets cakes and ingredients for porridge in the kitchen. She's got a sneaky one. You know what else she did? Messed up with our new security guard, Christopher. They clamp while everyone else is working. Now he's bringing his mistress all kinds of salts. She's got him all over the place. The worst thing is that he doesn't even realize the position he's in. If Katya opens her mouth and tells about their affair, he could be fired. If they believe him, of course. But who wouldn't believe the Countess? She can bring everyone to heel. What kind of bitch is she? Miranda's tone made it unclear whether she was jealous of the Countess's position, afraid of her, or admiring her. Lisa decided it was all of the above. I heard that the Countess had her eye on the new doctor and had forgotten all about Christopher. I didn't know it myself. But rumor has it that the new doctor, who's a handsome fellow, put her words in for the wretch. We girls don't usually like to complain about illnesses because it's medicine that maims instead of cures. The last time Belikova complained about the pain of the experience, she had a tooth pulled. And what's wrong with that? Lisa quirked an eyebrow, not understanding where the logic broke down. Miranda and Bale glanced over and giggled, satisfied that they could retell a local joke. It wasn't like she'd had her teeth ripped out, and without anesthesia. So she had 2 teeth missing at once. Good thing it wasn't in the front. One good thing, she changed her nickname right away. Now Belikova is our shark. She'd be happy to ban Gamova. That's why we're in no hurry to get into the hospital wing. If you say you have a stomachache, they'll cut out your kidney. Only now there will be a queue of suffering people. It's been a long time since we've had handsome men, only in pictures. Have you seen them? And this one can touch you if you don't bring countesses to him. The first. The girls giggled. Aunt Nancy looked at them judgmentally. Lisa blushed. She was having trouble getting used to the words of the local lingo. The Countess's chesty laughter echoed through the dining room, which caught Miranda's attention again. Yes, our Countess needs everyone. A deck of trump cards is being assembled, poked a disgruntled light, porridge, and gnawed a piece of gray bread with exasperation. She knows how to twist her tail. If the Countess has an affair with the doctor, she will go to the infirmary like to a sanatorium, and then live on pills. Christopher can't cope with her demands, can he? Covenant was not surprised by such stories. She had already begun to get used to the local order and knew that many ladies from local prisoners have intimate relations with the prison staff. In this way, they hope to receive special treatment and relaxation during their sentences. She was also aware that the Countess is the chief of substances in the zone. Except that the coveted medicines were not thrown over the fence and baked rolls were not handed to her. No bread. She used her employees for transit. You taking them in? Lisa heard the Countess was a former medical officer. She was serving time for selling counterfeit drugs and dealing in illegal substances. It was obvious that in prison she did not want to reform, but only improved her talents as a bargainer. Lisa involuntarily turned around and looked in the direction of the Countess. The prisoner was just behind Livis Courtling, and her minions were barely looking into the woman's mouth. Lisa thought that the Countess stood out very much from the rest of the prisoners. These women, though they tried to lid their eyes and lips, were still unconverted, menacing, somehow gray and unassuming. Their makeup reminded Lisa of a child's attempt at something that had fallen out of her mother's makeup bag. The Countess, on the other hand, was to match her nickname. Camille was tall, with fine facial features, a beautiful figure and soft-looking plump lips, which she painted every morning with scarlet lipstick. Except that these lips never smiled and all but slid teeth, and the look in her green eyes was evil, piercing, as if an X-ray machine was shining through. At some point, Lisa realized that this gaze was directed directly at her. The Countess raised her hand. It was Pyriev who ran his thumb along her throat, decorated with tattoos in the form of flowers. Caught Lisa turned pale and turned away abruptly, barely missing her nose, bumping into a plate of porridge. Miranda clucked her tongue. She loves you, I see. She's got you close to her heart. Why wouldn't you two have crossed paths on the outside? Maybe you spit in her food? Or ha ha ha. I loved Lisa. Shook your head. No, I don't know her. I don't know why she's always clinging. The girl admitted bitterly. The Countess had been giving Lisa a hard time ever since she arrived at the prison. She bullied, teased the prisoner, forced her to exhaust herself at work in the sewing shop, working above the norm. She also demanded money from Lisa for amenities for her own cell, citing that the inmates are wealthy parents who own a chain of restaurants. Lisa advised these Nancy did not argue with the Countess. even shared the contents of her gear with her a couple of times with cosmetics, cigarettes, and provisions. Lisa hoped that the Count, having failed to fight back, would back off. Then Lisa couldn't stand one incident. It happened a week ago. The Countess, having learned that Lisa was a singer, ordered her to be dragged to her cell by her lackeys. There, the Countess, sitting businesslike on a thin, throne-like chair, ordered Lisa to climb on a stool and sing songs for her and her guests. Lisa refused to fulfill the role of court jester. She did not give in even when Shmeleva, the Countess's right hand, painfully grabbed her by the hair and repeated the order. The Countess considered Lisa's stubbornness to be a spit in the face, so she set out to spoil Lewin's life. She began by doing just that, and she ran over a woman. When Lisa was dragged into the cell that night and thrown to the floor, Nancy Soap's teacher came to her. Cleaned her up, shook her head, and asked, couldn't Lisa just sing? Lisa remained silent. She hates Vanessa because she saw a competitor in her. Christina willingly shared her thoughts, insisting the flash drive to her neighbor. Lisa, you're a beauty. Christopher can't take his eyes off her. In fact, all the men around here look at her when she walks by. Even her grandfather, even though he hasn't had a hard-on in years. Then there's Lisa, the rich actress who was in the papers. Of course she's jealous. What do you say, Lisa? Lewin Miranda winked merrily. It's on the Countess's, boys. I'm not interested in men. Lisa hastily blurted out, but remembering the rumors about women's colonies, fearfully added women too. I've just been burned twice by relationships, and I don't intend to have any more. Lisa wasn't lying about her determination. Her first love had broken the girl's heart with a whimper. Her second love, in which she was just looking for an opportunity to forget herself, had sent the prisoner to jail. They announced the end of breakfast and allowed them to go out for a walk in honor of the day off. Lisa was just waiting for this opportunity to take a breath of air and look at the sun. She wanted to get up, but a hand came down on her shoulders, forcing her to sit down abruptly. Stove, mole. Why haven't you eaten? The Countess's hushed voice stitched, making Lisa covered in goosebumps. Not to the taste of our exquisite dishes. I'm not hungry, whispered Lisa, trying not to look into the face of her mother, whom she sincerely feared. Maybe you don't like the way my friends cook? Katya insisted. You're used to foie gras and champagne for breakfast. Star Miranda, leave the girl alone. Nancy spoke up. There's nothing to share. The teacher was one of the few people the Countess had any respect for, whether because of her age or because the teacher reminded the prisoner of her mother. However, now the woman did not want to back down either. I'm just worried Aunt Nancy has relaxed. Count. She has become pale, thin, does not eat at all. And now the bowl of porridge is full. Not a spoonful has our princess sat down. Lisa, throwing back her head, looked into the woman's green eyes. Suddenly to herself, Lisa felt anger rising through her. It rose from her stomach and hit the blood in her head. Why are you so interested in my plate? She asked before she could take a bite. You want to finish your tongue for me? Don't be shy. Tell me, am I not greedy? If you need to donate something, also come. She loudly ahed, whispered barely audible. What a fool! The others murmured. The Countess staggered for a brief moment of astonished rebuff in silence. She quickly pulled herself together, however. Lisa did not realize at what moment the bunny grabbed her by the hair and with a sharp movement pushed her face into the bowl of porridge. Oatmeal flew up her nose in a flash. Behind molding eyes, Lisa opened her mouth to take a breath, but the Countess didn't let her off the hook. Like a cat, she lunged at the singer. Bitch, she sang out. You still don't realize where you are. You're nobody here. So don't open your mouth in the wrong place. Lisa, whose vision was still obstructed from the mush on her face by the tire lash, tried to fight back by touch. However, the singer was hard to resist. Aggressive ex-bunnies. You make up your mind. What should I do, silence or sing songs? Growled Lisa irritably. Fractured more and more. She'd only been in jail a month, but she'd learned things, like how to show her teeth. Lisa fiercely wiped the cold mush off her face, looked in the reddened face of the Countess, who was dragged away. Usually at this point, the bunny was already being stretched by the workers, except that Christopher the newcomer did not risk prying into her mistress. I tolerated being measured next to her. Can you even sing? Howled the Count. The first read an article about you. They say you poisoned a talented girl because you couldn't do a damn thing yourself. She sang for you. That's what they say. And your family? Did she get money for it? Rich people can do anything, but it's a surprise, Major. We're all equal here. You're just like us. Heart in your chest. Lisa pounded furiously, sending hot, lava-like blood through her body. It rushed to her throat. Lisa didn't notice as she opened her mouth and sang. She sang hotly, passionately, as if she were on stage in the middle of a play. The bunnies, amazed, froze when they heard how beautiful it was, filled with emotion and color in the prisoners' voices. Lisa, on the other hand, looked into the eyes of therapist Kochka, who even had her mouth ajar. Lewin's eyes read the self-confidence she had been hiding before. Morning, give me hope. I want to run after my dreams again, just like before. Lisa sang the words of the song that first came to her mind, Happiness from the musical Cats. When she finished, there was a strange silence, like in the hall during a play. Except that the artist was not expecting applause. I'm better than you. And it's not even about the money, whispered Lisa at the end of her solo. She realized that she had made a fatal mistake. The Countess's nostrils flared. She lunged at her rival like a wildcat again. They tumbled onto the table, sweeping away the remains of their plates. Miranda winced with fright. Nancy was begging the girls to get back together. Only now the warden's whistles sounded. The Countess, covering the curse, was pulled away from the heavy breathers. Lewin, someone touched the face of Weather the Covenants, and she saw Christopher in front of her. Are you all right, Lewin? He asked with genuine concern. Lisa nodded confusedly. I'm fine. However, the guard frowned, noticing the scratches on the girl's face. They counted and answered, I'll take you to the infirmary, he said, helping her up and holding her elbow. Stop. The car rumbled, the harshest of the wardens down. Ifremova. Where is the instigator? It was not her fault, said Christopher confidently. The Count pounced on her. I saw it. The Countess, who was already being led out of the dining room, taking under white hands, turned sharply. Only she did not look at Christopher, that she was betrayed by Liza. It was the look that made Lewin's knees buckle. What have I done? Idiot. The woman thought fearfully. At the hospital, Lisa followed the man on automatic. She didn't understand why he was being so kind, but she sensed that the guard's attentions would still bode trouble for her. When Lewin was brought to the medical wing, she was still in shock. Lisa had never been in a fight in her life, though more than a few bruises and abrasions. She was afraid of what she would answer for her stroppiness. Sit here, Lewin. The doctor will be here in a moment, the guard said and touched Lisa's shoulder one last time. She tried not to twitch at his touch, though she was sure the man had held his hand too long. As Christopher walked out, Lisa heard his voice in the hallway. Brought you a patient. You should be careful there. She has a pretty face, you can't spoil it. We don't have many of those around here. And she sings like she gives me goosebumps, he said, whistling as he walked away. Lisa felt sick. Of course, all singers dream of recognition, but she didn't want that kind of attention. She lowered her face, hiding it behind her hair, which her adversary had sung to properly ruffle and whip into a crow's nest. She heard the doctor enter the office, then froze. A few more cautious steps in her direction, and then a short, like a heartbeat, Lisa. Barely did the woman hear the doctor's voice as her heart did, a somersault jumping up into her throat. She threw her head back, deciding that the rumor had played tricks on her. But then her eyesight was also in cahoots with him, failing her. For in front of her stood most definitely the man she had abandoned before her wedding. What are you doing here? She murmured, looking at the man with horror. Then, as if remembering that she had a prosecutor's mess in her tangled hair and was wearing a prison uniform, she turned away abruptly. Blushing thickly, Lisa clenched her teeth, ashamed of her position and appearance. Amazing Lisa, she thought bitterly. Have you found a way to surprise your first love? Stephen looked beautiful, as handsome and statuesque as ever. It was not for nothing that the prisoners were as excited as if a fox had been let into the henhouse. It made Lisa feel even worse. What happened? Asked the man. He came closer and leaned over to look at the patient. Of course, Lisa was going to go out of pride, but she couldn't. She was tired. And did she have the right to disobey the doctor? Stephen began to treat the wounds. His movements were gentle and careful. The man worked in silence. Lisa did not know where to look and finally looked at his face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, unable to stand the silence. "You used to work at the family clinic." Stephen looked briefly into her eyes. "I think your answer to that question would be much more interesting than mine," the doctor said reasonably. "How did you get here, Lisa?" Lisa shouted, "Didn't you read the papers?" "I poisoned my rival." Her husband's mistress, Lisa involuntarily snarled. Stephen, however, surprised her with a new question. "If I wanted to talk to journalists, I wouldn't be here, Lisa," he said. "What really happened?" Lisa looked at him with astonishment, but still with force. "Language." "You won't believe me," the prisoner said bitterly. "No one did." Stephen's hand froze. Then he threw away the vodka, flushed with blood. "Why are you like this?" Again he tried to make a dialogue. "Him." "For the pretty eyes," Lisa mumbled, not knowing what to say. Unexpectedly, Stephen smiled at her. "Then the occasion was a good one," the doctor remarked, sticking a band-aid on the patient's cheekbones. Lisa's heart clenched, then fluttered with a caught bird. She stared into her ex-fiancé's face, unwilling to look away. Stephen froze as well. It seemed that Stephen wanted to say something else, but Christopher returned to the office. He looked at both of them and said grudgingly, "That's enough, prisoner. It's time to go to the cell." On the way to the cell, Christopher struck up a conversation with Lisa. Although the woman was more silent, he hinted that he could make her life in prison easier. The man seemed to believe in himself when he contacted the Countess. Lisa, however, was not listening to him. Stephen's face stood before her eyes. She could still feel the man's cold fingers touching her face. While he was treating the scratches, Lisa suddenly realized that the usually collected Stephen had forgotten to put on his gloves. Whether from confusion or excitement, the thought made the warm woman furtively smile. All day Lisa had been diligently pushing away thoughts of Stephen and the past that bound them together, the wedding that never happened, the love that ended in her tears. The woman tried to distract herself, but as soon as the lights were turned off and the cell was silent, the memories came flooding back. There was no escape from them. Lisa sighed resignedly and turned on her side, covering her eyes. She thought about what had started only 3 years ago, though it seemed to her that the events were in a past life. Lisa had met Stephen while watching an old musical. They ended up in adjacent seats in the old movie theater. It was January, snowy, fabulous. During these days of the New Year's holidays, the Dawn Movie Theater was hosting an old movie marathon. Lisa adored this cinema, old and cozy. It had only 2 halls, but it had stayed afloat for what must have been half a century. Despite the fact that they had built multiplexes in nearby shopping centers, but in its heyday they decided to bribe the public with other things. For example, the floors with nightly screenings of classic movies, 1 ticket for a ball, catchy umbrellas, please, 5th row in the middle. Lisa asked the cashier. As she made her way to the movie rooms, Lisa saw that there weren't many people who wanted to watch the musical for a sleepover. 2 couples had taken kissing seats in the back row of everyone on either side of the auditorium. Obviously, they would be preoccupied with each other and not the pictures on the screen. A company of 4 girls and giggled softly. Elsewhere in the hall, Lisa had taken her place in the center and intended to be busy watching trailers and eating popcorn. However, as soon as the hall fell into a pleasant darkness, someone sat down next to her. Lisa, of course. Vita glanced at the person who had few empty seats. She didn't take a handful of air corn to her mouth because she was dumbfounded. The young man looked as if he had stepped out of a Hollywood movie screen in the light that poured from the screen, his face as pale as marble. A flash on the screen picked out a pronounced lip line, cheekbones, a shadow, and a downward address. Then everything faded again, plunging the viewers into darkness. However, Lisa could no longer take her eyes off her neighbor, and the man who had so unceremoniously violated her personal space was Stephen. Soon he would become her boyfriend, then her fiancé, and then he would break her heart into shards. But at this moment, the girl didn't know the future, she only saw his profile. Suddenly, Stephen turned to face her and looked directly into her eyes, smiling openly as if they were longtime friends. The screen there noticed he jabbed a finger toward the screen where the trailers were spinning. "Or I'm more interesting." Lisa blinked, startled, and twitched, turning sharply, scattering sweet ship popcorn all over the floor of the movie theater. A wormy, reddened neck. The girl squinted at the stranger, who looked extremely pleased. It was just interesting to see a person who in a huge empty hall decided to find a neighbor. "Why did you sit here?" Out of embarrassment, Lisa immediately went on the offense. Because two lonely people shouldn't sit in different corners of the theater, especially when they're watching an old musical. "It's not healthy. I'm telling you as a doctor," he responded, not the least bit embarrassed at the stranger. "What makes you think I'm single?" "Maybe I'm waiting for a boyfriend." Lisa was indignant, blushing. Stefanova looked into her eyes again. A slight, charming smile was on his lips. If he lets such a charming girl wait for him, what kind of guy is he? He raised an eyebrow. Lisa tried to sneer some more. However, she soon gave up. The onslaught of the guy's insolent charm and his imperturbability. Soon the young people were already discussing the movie, joking and eating popcorn, losing it from their buckets. A friend of a friend, apparently, and he assured that the best thing is to eat two kinds at the same time, a combination of sweet and salty. "It's a perfect pairing," he remarked, stealing his neighbor handfuls of ship's snacks. "So not only are you a doctor, but you're also a foodie." "Lisa, why didn't you buy both flavors then?" "I was hoping to meet the sweet popcorn man, and I wasn't wrong." He winked at Lisa, causing her to flush again. Maybe it was fate when their fingers made contact on the popcorn bucket. The girl felt a flock of butterflies circling in her stomach, tickling her ribs with their thin wings. She didn't think she'd ever felt it before. After the movie, the young people walked the city streets, drinking cocoa, until dawn painted the high-rise buildings in shades of orange and pink. Lisa thought that it had been a long time since she had laughed for so long that even her stomach ached and tears ran to her eyes every now and then. Stephen was incredibly easy for her to be with. She felt as if she could talk to him about anything, as if he were a random fellow traveler on a train she would never see again. She did not realize at what point she had time to tell the guy that she dreamed of playing a major role in the musical Chicago. And when she told him that her birth father had died in a car accident and her mom had married her best friend, which became her stepfather, Stephen was also candid. He turned out to be a young, aspiring doctor. He told Lisa that the idea of becoming a doctor came from his parents, whom he respected immensely and did not want to disappoint. Stephen also had a younger sister, Molly, whom everyone called Molly for some reason. Lisa did not understand why this beautiful, sweet girl took the name of the famous demon from the myths. However, she soon realized that such a name is just right. Fits the twosome and the girl. Lisa was enchanted by Stephen at first sight. In love. From the second date, she introduced her boyfriend to her mother and stepfather. A month into the relationship, her parents accepted the potential son-in-law as their own son. And Lisa's younger brother, Jenka, adored Stephen. Of course, when Stephen, after a year of relationship, got down on one knee and proposed marriage, Lisa Summer did not think over the answer. A confident, full of happiness, yes came off her lips. She hugged her fiancé without noticing the change in his gaze. And so the big day had come. Lisa and Stephen were to be married. The guests were already wandering around the country mansion, rented for the whole weekend. The registry clerk stood at the arch and discussed the nuances of the ceremony with the organizer. Yes, it was here, by the silvery lake, stroked by white-pink lilies floating in the water. Lisa and Stephen decided to marry and take a vow of love and fidelity. Lisa, picking up her skirt, ran down the hall. She had a sly smile on her lips. She had escaped from the supervision of her bridesmaids and mother. She kept her course for the room reserved for the groom to steal a kiss from him before the ceremony began. Lisa didn't believe in omens, so the thought of the groom seeing her before the wedding in the bride's white dress didn't scare her. She really wanted to see her lover and future husband. Except that barely the girl, having enlisted, ran to the right door, behind which the future husband was hiding. She was forced to feel the influence of omens. The bride's slender fingers touched the round knob, but she did not turn it at once. The bride froze as she heard the argument outside the door. "You have no right to give up," the girl said. "Stephen, you must see it through." "Isn't that what you're a naive fool for?" "Don't say that about Lisa," asked Stephen. "What, Stephen, have you forgotten who she is? You've forgotten who she is? You've forgotten who's really always been on your side. You have to tell her the truth. Leave her at the altar, make her suffer for yourself, for your mother's memory." "Have you forgotten?" "Of course not. I just can't, Molly, you can't." "Then I will." Let's see if she'll be just as in love with you if she finds out the whole truth about us without giving herself credit." Lisa yanked open the door, swinging it open. Behind her she saw Stephen and Molly. The brother held his sister by the arm, hovering over her. "Lisa, I won't say anything for," growled Stephen in a tone that Lisa had never heard from him before. "And you understand me too?" Everything changed. Molly shielded her eyes, but then her gaze darted behind her fiancé's back. At first she was surprised, but then her beautiful lips stretched into a satisfied chuckle. "Too late, kin," she declared, pulling her arm out of her older brother's grasp. Stephen turned around sharply at the entrance. When he spotted the bride frozen there in her splendor, he was dazed for a moment, at first struck by the beauty of his beloved, who was like the lower snowdrop flower that first emerged from the frozen ground after Earth's winter. Thin, pale, fragile, trembling in the wind. But was there still hope for warmth in those who spotted it? It did not take Stephen long, however, to admire Lisa's beauty. He noticed with what horror she was looking at him. "How much have you heard?" He exhaled, frightened. It didn't matter how much she had heard. What mattered was how much she had to learn. Molly giggled, peeking out from behind the man's shoulder. Lisa had a smug look on her face, like a cat with a lunging canary. Molly leaned defiantly on her brother's shoulder, keeping her gaze on Lisa. The brunette pulled up and whispered something in his ear. He grimaced, trying to pull away. "Stephen," whispered the bride, confused, frightened. "What's going on? What's going on between you two?" "Listen, Lisa." The man rushed toward her, but Lisa was in a hurry. "No. Don't touch me. I want to know first. Tell her," exclaimed Molly with her hands. Her black eyes sparkled and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. She must know the truth. "You love her, don't you? Since you're so good, here's no need to start your marriage with lies." "Dear little brother." "Shut up, Molly." Stephen snapped at her. Lisa felt a crust of ice forming inside her. This thin ice seemed to break with every breath she took. Built. The babies fit into her lungs from the inside out. The bride put a hand to her rib cage because the physical were real, not phantom. The corset seemed too tight for her. There wasn't enough air. "Lisa, have you gone pale?" scared Stephen, taking a step toward her. One more attempt to touch the bride. "No. Don't touch me," repeated Lisa years ago. "Speak." Of course, in the girl's mind already makeup to make the explanation horrible and hurtful must be. Molly was not his sister. They'd been cheating on her, having an affair behind her back all this time. Gross. That's so gross. What are you two? Lovers? The white bride to herself. A silence hung, broken by the woman's hysterically obnoxious laughter. Molly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye before replying. "You'd like it better, baby." Trying to catch her breath, she said. Such words confused Lisa even more. She looked confusedly into Stephen's face, which appeared lost. Finishing it, demanded Molly abruptly cut short her own mirth. Then she, high-heeled, left the room. The bride and groom were left alone. Lisa was looking into her lover's face. He, on the contrary, averted his gaze. "It will be a long and unpleasant conversation," Stephen said, looking out of the window. "We can postpone it. I beg you." "No," Lisa shook her head emphatically, clenching her fists and shifting the folds of the delicate fabric in her fingers. "Tell me what she meant." Stephen licked his lips, then hooked his fingers into his hair, just perfectly styled. Resolved, the man straightened his shoulders and looked into his bride's face with a heavy Kyrie look. Lisa didn't like the eye. It did not bode well. "You promise me you'll listen to the end and try to understand me without jumping to conclusions. You're in no position to set conditions." Lisa's mouth batted, but once again, at Stephen's struggling look, she nodded reluctantly. "Okay, I'm listening." Her heart was pounding as fast as if she were rolling in a roller coaster car. And she had no idea if the next second would be a rise, a fall, or icy water. "Our meeting was no accident," Stephen said in a tone devoid of emotion. "As if you were reading me an interesting story. Then in the movie theater, I didn't just sit next to you. I knew your name, I knew your habits, all your friends, the things you like. Autumn more than any other season. What kind of coffee do you drink? Pumpkin latte in cold weather and coffee with orange juice in the heat. Knew all of them. I followed you to that movie theater too, knowing how much you loved that movie. But if you hadn't come that night, I would have found another way to meet you." "But why?" Lisa whispered as the silence dragged on. Stephen looked into her eyes with a short grin that had too much sadness in it. You do realize why, don't you? To get us here. He spread his hands, glancing around the beautiful room, so that you'd fall in love with me as hard as you could. To agree to marry me. Everything the groom told her further reminded Lisa of a terrible nightmare, not a harsh reality. Stephen had come into Lisa's life to ruin it. He had taken on the ridiculous role of avenger, blaming her for sins she had not committed. Remember you told me about your father and his tragic death? Stephen said softly, as if it hurt to force the words out of his throat. You said he was in the car with another woman. But I left out one important detail. She was his mistress, right? How do you know? Whispered Lisa, who had actually kept such an embarrassing truth from her fiancé's family. Her dad had died in a traffic accident and her mistress was sitting next to him. Her mom, upon learning of this, was almost depressed. At once, news about the death and betrayal of her husband knocked the air out of her lungs. However, next to her all the time was Vadim's best friend, who in the future became Lisa's stepfather. The man supported them, protected them. Over time, they tried to forget about the past. However, it knocked on the door again, and it was done by someone from whom Lisa did not expect it. Stephen looked into Lisa's face before he shocked her with the truth. Her name was Svetlana, and she was my mom. Lisa let out a convulsive sigh, her eyes widened with shock. Stephen, however, did not finish his confession. Did you know that our parents were in accidents for a reason? Your father was a dishonest man who built his business on blood. His competitors decided to get rid of him. He looked into Lisa's eyes. It was a contract killing. Your company was taken away from you right away, remember? Except it was your father who had to suffer, not my mother. She was a woman in love, and a naive fool. But people shouldn't die for that, you know? Stephen took a couple of steps to the window, looking outside. The guests were already seated on beautiful white chairs decorated with ribbons. The bridesmaids were handing out ice-colored confetti for the guests to shower on the newlyweds. Live music was playing. Guests drank champagne and enjoyed desserts and appetizers in anticipation of the holiday. However, this celebration seemed unreal to Lisa, as if it was not a couple of steps away from them, but in another world. Lisa looked at Stephen's profile. She remembered the first time she saw him and fell in love. Just like that, at first sight, like in ridiculous novels. She felt Stephen had not finished his confession, and she was right. After the truth about my mother's affair came out, my father lost his peace and sanity, Stephen pronounced, indifferently looking at the beautifully dressed guests' flashing smiles. My mother was an artist of the night, creative. Like a brightly colored bird, she could wake up in the middle of the night and paint the walls in the hallway because inspiration struck her. Mom always smelled like paint and her beautiful hands were dirty. Dad was a down-to-earth man, an ordinary mechanic who smelled of fuel oil. However, he adored his wife more than anything else in the world. They were happy, as I remember. And then when Mom was gone, he lost the meaning of life. Later, he read her diaries. She wrote about her lover and how he wouldn't let her leave. Your father threatened her, you know. Stephen rubbed his lips and continued. Dad was angry and heartbroken. He started drinking his anger and he took his pain out on me. You know, I'm a lot like Dad. The only thing I got from my mother was my eyes. But he wouldn't see it that way. He shouted in my face, sputtering, nauseated, greasy saliva and breathing booze that I was not his son. He convinced me that my mother had me on the side. He abused me every single day. Chased me out of the house, even in the cold, with no clothes on. When Daddy was sober, he would hold me, rocking me like a baby, crawling on his lap, crying, begging me to forgive him. And then it would happen all over again. I was living in hell, and to be honest, I looked at my dad's face, which used to always glow and smile, but I didn't recognize him. I thought my dad was gone, and someone else had taken his place, like a demon that possessed people. Stephen shook his head, and the corner of his lip quivered as if he wanted to. He grinned at the childish fantasy, but he couldn't. Later, one of the neighbors called the child welfare authorities. They came for me, but I did not want to leave. I remember that I cried and touched them, but they took me away. At first I lived in the hospital. A psychologist was in constant contact with me. Then I was sent to an orphanage. My father was forbidden to see me. They said he was a bad influence on me. I think that's what the psychologist decided. I fought a lot and was withdrawn. And then when my dad lost everything, well, he was gone too. They found him in my mom's workshop. Me? I'm sorry. Lisa struggled to hold back the sobs that burst from his chest. But tell me, was it my fault? What did you want to do to me, Stephen? Stephen shook his head. I don't know, Lisa, he admitted honestly. Your father set it all in motion, you know. He started it first. Pulled the card out of the paper house of someone else's happiness, making it crumble. I hated him my whole life. I couldn't hate my father. Molly him my mother. She shouldn't have died. I couldn't take revenge on your father, but I could on his daughter. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to comprehend what she was hearing. Stephen continued in a tone devoid of color. I didn't decide to do it right away, though. I tried to forget honestly, tried to live another life. I even had the perfect chance to do so. I was adopted by the Plotnikov family. Their adult children are rarely taken home. I didn't expect such a miracle, but I was lucky enough to end up in a hospital. John came there on business. I don't know why he liked me, but the doctor's heart went out to me. He and Adriana adopted me. They couldn't have children, but when I ended up in their home, Adriana found out she was pregnant. I remember when they told me they were expecting a baby, I went to the nursery and started packing. When John and Adriana came in, they were genuinely surprised, asking where I was going. I replied that they didn't need someone else's baby now that they were expecting their own. And then she cried and started hugging me. You know, they're great parents. However, I never got to call them mom and dad. I didn't want to betray my own parents. He rubbed his forehead as if hoping to smooth out the wrinkles. I began to live a fake, puppet life, as if I were playing someone else's role, Stephen confessed, remembering his past. In general, I was just trying to repay the family that had taken me in, to justify their trust, so I was the perfect big brother to Molly. For Adriana and John, I tried to be a model son, became captain of the soccer team, graduated high school with a gold medal, then enrolled in medical school to work at John's clinic. But you and your family never left my mind. I couldn't find happiness in anything, you know. Yet I honestly tried to forget about it, to put you all out of my mind, until I went to one damn concert. Lisa looked into her fiancé's face, met his gaze. He was devastated, doomed. I saw you on stage. You were performing at a student celebration, singing songs from Romeo and Juliet, standing in a black dress. Its shiny fabric glowed like the scales of a fish in the spotlight. I recognized you immediately because I've followed your family's life at times. From that moment on, something inside me snapped, broke. I started thinking about you all the time. Stephen exhaled hotly. I started looking for information about you. That's when I found out you were studying to be a singer. Found out that your mother was happily in her second marriage, that you had a younger brother. I found out you own a chain of restaurants. Thanks to what? Damn it, Lisa, I became obsessed with you, you know. After what I'd been through, I thought you had no right to be happy. I wanted to do something to get back at you. And when I gave everything to Molly, she convinced me that the best revenge for a girl is to break her heart, to dump her in front of everyone at the wedding. Lisa turned pale. Realizing what awaited her, she felt sick and dizzy, so she abruptly rested her hand against the wall. Stephen, shifting in his face, rushed to his bride's aid. Lisa, are you okay? Are you kidding me? She shrieked. Ari, how can I be okay after what I've heard? You lied to me, you always have. Then Molly's face appeared before Lisa's eyes, smirking. So you're step-siblings then? Lisa asked, feeling like a fool. If she was interested in such questions after such revelations, she wasn't looking at you like a brother, Stephen. The man was embarrassed. There's nothing between us. She's my sister, nothing more. He denied Lisa's conjecture. I wasn't going to bring Molly into this, but she and I have been close since she was born, so there are no secrets. She was helping me. Molly loves too much. Intrigue and romance. I told her today that things have changed. I can't do that to you. Only Molly was hit by a car, a spoiled girl. She didn't accept that outcome. That's what you saw. I can't believe it, whispered Lisa, fighting the incoming nausea. Blood pounded in her head. Her pulse pounded in her temples. You may not believe me, but now looking back, I began to realize why I was obsessed with you. You blinded me when you stood on stage. You made my head spin. I fell in love with you, Lisa, I swear. Stephen passionately confessed his feelings. I fell in love at first sight, but I knew I had no right to feel that way about the daughter of my worst enemy. I began to hate myself for my weakness, to despise myself. I thought I was weak, so I decided to prove that I was stronger than such emotions. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I'd feel better if I made you just as miserable. Then everything would be fair. Well, whispered Lisa, struggling to manage the dizziness and stand up straight. You've done it. Bravo. Did you make it? Stephen. A look of despair appeared on the groom's face. You promised to listen to me to the end. He exclaimed. Everything had changed. Lisa, I really did love you with all my heart. Only Lisa didn't believe him anymore. She shook her head, taking her heart from the so sweet and desirable words of the man she had come to love. It turns out I don't know you. Stephen, if our first meeting was a carefully planned performance, how much truth was there in your words, your promises, our relationship? No, the man I fell in love with, he would never do that. She turned away, wanting to leave this room as quickly as possible, to get that idiotic dress off. Stephen, however, rushed toward the bride and grabbed her arm, yanking her toward him. Lisa had unable to steady herself on her thin heels. Her back hit the groom's chest, and he immediately hugged her tightly from his soft arm, as if he'd walked into a trap. No, please, I beg you, give me a chance. Yes, it all started with a lie. If it hadn't, I would have met you in a different way, Lisa. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. Lisa's heart clenched. Stephen's hands trembled. Lisa didn't want to show him her tears. Now, however, she couldn't stand it. Hot, large drops slid down her cheeks, smearing her mascara and blush. She remembered when the makeup artist had conjured up Lisa's face this morning like a fairy godmother. She'd remarked that a bride's makeup had to be durable to withstand many tears of happiness. Obviously, with tears. Grief, disappointment. The makeup was impossible to fight. Let go, horse, uttered the girl with a clap of her hands. The men only squeezed harder against her chest with their backs. Lisa could feel Stephen's heart beating hard, as if it were ready to jump out, to burst through his chest. How she wanted to believe him, but she couldn't. Let go. She yelled with a shriek, coming forward. She managed to break free of the groom's grip, but the bride got tangled in the hem of her dress, falling to the floor. Stephen rushed to her, but Lisa, already openly sobbing, screamed in his face, "Stop, don't touch me, go away. I don't want to see you ever again. It's over, do you hear me? It's over." Stephen leaned toward her, opened his mouth and said, "Wake up." The warder yelled without hitting the cell door. "Wake up and you'll be tucked in." Lisa opened her eyes abruptly, popping up on the bed. Nancy looked at her in surprise and, seeing that arrogant, tear-wet face, shook her head regretfully. Lisa hastily wiped away her tears, muttered and guiltily, "I had a bad dream." The teacher did not comment on it. Lisa got up from her seat to start a new day, as gray as all the previous ones. At breakfast, she noticed the inmates squinting at her and whispering. She understood why this was happening. The Countess was not at breakfast, and Lisa turned to Miranda softly. "What about the Count?" Miranda, having almost entirely stuffed a boiled egg into her mouth, waved her hand, inhaling while she and Efrimov were sent to the isolation ward for fighting. "Christopher stood up for you." Voices, apparently, put the catcher, grumbled, and she with a stuffed mouth. "What happens when the Count comes out? I don't know. Pray, prepare your shiv, as I taught you." Lisa turned pale and pushed the buckwheat porridge away with trembling hands. However, this time Nancy moved the plate back. She looked at Lisa sternly. "What a mess. Eat, come on." She was right about one thing. Your skin and bones left to gain strength. They'll come in handy. Another week, which the Count spent in solitary confinement, passed quietly. Lisa kept hoping to see Stephen again, but the doctor never showed up. When Miranda came out, Lisa thought that she would immediately attack her. However, the Count now avoided fighting in public. Another week passed, which seemed to be the calm before the storm. One Saturday before the fight, Aunt Nancy approached Lisa with a request. "Blue, we can swap with the schoolboys for the night." Lisa was surprised and shrugged her shoulders. "Why not?" "Only why would you want to?" Mine isn't the least bit more comfortable. It sags at the bottom like a hammock. I have to measure in a certain position to fall asleep, the woman admitted. That's all right, Nancy waved her hand, smiling gently. Just want to sleep there tonight, give it a try. Old, I've got a quirk already. I feel like the air has a cold pull on my side. Then the teacher lowered her voice and, leaning closer to Lisa, added, yes, and God, they say, is always fidgeting over me. No strength. She's restless. Squeaks and squeaks. Maybe you can handle her a little easier. Lisa didn't argue. She was in a wonderful mood. Today was bath day. The water was almost hot. Lisa could relax and wash away her fatigue. Oh, and they said there would be a doctor's checkup tomorrow. Lewin couldn't wait to meet Stephen. She felt ridiculous, but she'd even borrowed some lip gloss and mascara from Ogniak, intending to put on makeup before her visit to the infirmary. Katya didn't touch her, which was a relief. The only problem was Christopher wouldn't let her go. Lisa, getting ready for bed, brushed her long blonde curls and hummed a song. Nancy looked at her and suggested, "You could have your hair braided. I haven't done it in a long time." Lisa smiled broadly, sure. She sat down on the floor next to the bed. Aunt Nancy. The older woman's hands began to pull the strands, weaving them together. Lisa covered her eyes in pleasure. Nancy, on the other hand, suddenly said, "You know, Lisa, I haven't told you why I'm sitting here, and not many people know. Everyone only guesses and scratches their tongues. I've heard all sorts of things about myself from the locals. You want to know the truth?" "Sure." Lisa nodded, surprised by this revelation. "I had a daughter named Wendy. Did you know she looked just like you? Look at her." The woman, holding Lisa's hair with one hand, reached under her pillow and pulled out a photograph. She held it out. Lisa saw a smiling young girl. It seemed to be a student, or even a high school student. Except that Lisa couldn't find any common features between them. Except that her hair was the same long, blonde color. "Beautiful," Lisa smiled. The girl's mother smiled softly, too. The picture was mint-salted. It was obvious that the photo was often held in their hands. "No longer is she my Galushka," Nancy quietly confessed. Though Lisa already understood what the woman was getting at. Hearing the pain in her words was hard. And knowing that the cute little girl from the photo was no longer living was hard, too. "I'm sorry," Lisa said, gently tucking the picture back in its place. "Children shouldn't have to leave us." Nancy sighed heavily and nodded. Wendy wanted to be an elementary school teacher. Did she like children? She was like me. I used to take her to school with me a lot. She used to sit in the back because her husband was away on business. So she liked it, Nancy told me as she styled Lisa's hair. She got into the institute on a budget. When they went to celebrate, they got her drunk. Drunk exactly I had her myself, a girl simple, honest, naive. A major there abused her. Lisa shuddered involuntarily. Nancy continued, "When my daughter came home, I'd already alerted the police, the neighbors. I'd never seen her late before. And then she didn't even call. My heart was troubled, even though the police said that the student had been out on a bender. Then the woman overshadowed Vasha, then came back in the morning. I didn't recognize the Valentine then. Her dress was torn. She came barefoot, her feet chipped by a road stone. Her hair. What did I do to her before I left? I was upset. She looked at me without emotion, didn't cry, even told me everything straight. And you know you had the same eyes when you first came in here? Empty, scary." Nancy let out another long breath. Her voice trembled. It must have been a long time since she'd shared her story with anyone. We tried to bring the major to justice. It was a nightmare. He assured us, and his friends were pushing him, that Vasya had jumped into his arms herself, that she herself had been drinking, that she herself had started the whole thing, so that the money of passion in the institute would make fun of her, mocked her, said that it was her own fault. Aunt Nancy interrupted the story. "I've finished with your hair." Lisa turned to face her, touched her hands to her hair, which the woman had poured into something intricate. "Thank you, Aunt Nancy," she smiled. The woman sat down for a moment, seeing Lisa's face, which was now no longer hidden by her long hair. She touched her cheek with tenderness as well. Her fingers trembled. "Do you really look like her? But you're stronger. You'll get through this. No matter how much you're hurt, don't give up on the blue," she said emphatically. Then her gaze abruptly faded, lost its luster. My daughter couldn't handle the pressure. She couldn't handle the shame. She left me a farewell letter, apologizing. Then they found her body in the river. Lisa felt Nancy's pain as her own. She reached forward and gently put her arms around the woman's narrow shoulders. Nancy lowered her head gratefully. The perpetrator of all this came to me then, asking me what I wanted for my silence. And I wanted only one thing, that my daughter should live longer. I would have given my life for it. Only he couldn't fulfill my wish. How did you end up here? Did you do something to him? Lisa wondered. Aunt Nancy grinned slyly. You know there is no dirtier person than an angry mother. Next, did you get it right? I was disillusioned with justice and decided to settle the score with my own hands. Except all I wanted was a confession, you know. But when I went to him, this guy, he laughed at me. And at my Golubkina too. God rest her soul. Then I couldn't stand it and pushed him through the open window. He crawled out of the second floor, only he survived. I still ended up in here for attempted murder. His father hired the best lawyers to hide me. Lisa shook her head, thinking how unfair the world was. Nancy, meanwhile, took her daughter's picture in her hands, stroked it with her fingers. I couldn't save my daughter. I might at least save another poor soul, muttered the woman, looking at the photo. She hastily wiped her tears, fearing they would drip on the photo. And what about your husband? Remembered another character in Lisa's story. He's waiting for me. The old stump, Nancy said fondly. He writes letters. She says he won't die until we see each other. Lisa smiled. She thought that her spouse had not been spoiled with attention this month, although Lisa didn't expect a letter from him, unless it was the divorce papers. The idyll between Nancy and Lisa was interrupted by the voice of Ogonyok, who returned to their cell. Holy shit, Maxim, exclaimed Miranda, seeing Lisa's hairdo. Nancy's mom, I want a beauty like that too. Your hair is short. I can only put a bow on top, the woman said with a good-natured smile. Miranda started to laugh jokingly. Lisa looked in her pocket at the mirror for the first time. She smiled, noticing how beautiful Nancy's hands had made her. Aunt Nancy, can you plate me tomorrow too? Lisa blurted out involuntarily before the doctor's examination. Nancy suddenly laughed with the answer. Miranda sputtered. Why are you getting ready for a date with a doctor like that? Primary joined her with suspicion. Luckily for Lisa, they announced it was time to call it quits. Although Ogonek flicked her neighbor on the nose, she promised to return to this interesting topic. At night, Lisa fell asleep on Nancy's bed with her hand tucked under her pillow. She felt the rectangle of the photo with her fingers and realized that the woman had left a picture of her daughter. Lisa felt immensely sorry for the girl and her mother, yet she still felt a kind of mental uplift. She thought for the first time that her life was going to work out. With these thoughts, she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Lisa woke up to a strange noise. Her sleep was still responsive in a place that was foreign to her. The woman opened her eyes. The cell was dark, but she caught shadows, as if someone was moving. At first, she thought Miranda or Bale stood up. Then there was a whisper, but the voices were foreign forces. Keep your mouth shut so you don't take any chances. Groaning, footsteps, the creak of springs quelled. A groan of pain, another. All this Lisa at first took as part of a dream, stubbornly unwilling to wake up. It was the woman who had put everything to sleep. Yes, answered she, so sang her beauty. And then Lewin was struck on the head as if by a blow. She jumped up sharply in her seat, looking after the people who were leaving their cell, and hurried to lock the door behind them. Stop, she shouted. Hearing her stranger's voice, everyone dropped and rushed on. Lost to the smart hallway, Lisa threw off the blanket, rushing to Nancy's bed. She touched her shoulder, turning her toward her. Nancy's aunt called out. She was beginning to shake with fright. Aunt Nancy. The woman didn't answer. In the darkness, Lisa's hand felt something hot and sticky. She squealed and then yelled, Miranda, Christina, get up. Lisa rushed to the door, pounding on the bars with her bare hands. Security, security. We need a doctor. We need a doctor now. There was an uproar. The lights came on. There was a rush. Lisa sat on the floor of the cell, shaking with terror. She was looking at the pale Nancy. She noticed now that her hair, usually gathered, was loose. This was how Lisa of color had slept. The woman was wearing a warm touloup, which helped a little to protect her from her attackers. An investigation began. Lisa was questioned more than once, but she answered only what she knew. She did not give the names of those she suspected. Miranda and Christina forbade her to talk about it. Her friends that night slapped Lewin's cheek so hard it hurt, and they demanded, "Don't you dare knock. Do you hear me? Don't talk about the Countess." How could I? Lisa argued, clenching her shaking hands into a fist. They're Nancy. Nancy's mother lay in your place because she knew about the plans of those skins before anyone else, Miranda parried, looking hard into Lisa's eyes. Make sure her sacrifice is not in vain. I see they're a key somewhere on the ball. Not enough for you. You want to walk out of here with your feet up? Lisa didn't want to. Now she was really afraid. Miranda count. How the 2 days passed, Lisa didn't remember. She was afraid of everything. She even slept with one eye open. Miranda and Bale had taken pity on her and started to be on duty in her cell so she could get some sleep. Lisa didn't understand why they were so kind, but she was grateful. On the third day, during a walk, Lisa was approached by the man she had dreamed of seeing. Stephen walked briskly across the site and nodded to Lisa. Lewin, come with me. All the tests were taken on Sunday. Did you testify? No, lazy. I have to close my charts, said the doctor in a deliberately businesslike tone. Under the stares of strangers, he led Lisa into the building. Would you have sent someone else? She said reproachfully. My life is not easy enough as it is. And when you're seen with you, I'm a mess. Is Nancy awake? Stephen interrupted her. Thought you'd want to see her. She asked and caught you. She nodded, averting her gaze. They hurried to the medical wing. There the woman rushed to the bed on which a pale Nancy lay. Lisa took her hand, pressed that one to her lips. How are you? I'm fine. We were lucky with the doctor. He's got the best hands. I don't know how he got here. Nancy looked at Stephen with a bright smile. He, coughing, tactfully said, I'll leave you to it. Lisa asked the patient, why did you do that? They came to see me, she said bitterly. That's why I decided to do it. I heard them discussing their outing. They wouldn't just leave me alone. I know they will now. But we should have asked the guards for help. Nancy smiled. Do you still believe in their help? The older woman said bitterly, You are a bright soul, Lisa. A lump appeared in Lisa's throat. She squeezed the woman's hand tighter. Didn't I tell you how I came to be here? She whispered. Would you like to hear my version, not the one in the papers? Nancy nodded. You don't have to, but I want to. Insisted Lisa and licked her lips. Trying to get my thoughts together so you can understand me. I'll start from afar. I was once madly in love. This man was my first true love. However, his feelings turned out to be. Then my heart was broken. The pain of it was so intense that I made the huge mistake of rushing into the arms of the first person who opened his arms for me, comforting me. I don't know if I wanted revenge on my ex-fiancé or to save myself, but I did what I did. Nancy weakly squeezed Nancy's fingers as if comforting. Lisa continued. Robert was a friend of mine. We'd known each other since we were students at the Art Institute. He became a young and successful director, directing plays, operas, musicals. And I was a singer, but I dreamed of playing in a musical. Of course, I always saw him as a friend. I didn't like him at all. I guess that's why I paid the price. I thought if my mom could find comfort with her friend, so could I. Like they say, you'll always love him. But I never did. Nancy listened attentively, though Lisa realized that her stories were confusing and incomprehensible. She took a breath, however, and continued more measuredly. I married Robert right after the wedding went off. It was only a month, and I still remember the strange sensation when I kissed him for the first time. I could feel his lips, his hands, his breath. But at the same time, my soul was silent. Like a lady not eating, my heart wasn't fluttering. There were no butterflies in my stomach. I knew he loved me. I let him. I didn't cheat. I didn't hurt him. But he still only got worse around me, Lisa confessed. One day I got the lead role in his new musical. The critics predicted it would be a furor. There was also a lot of gossip that I became a prima donna because I was the director's wife. But that wasn't true. I prepared for the performance by giving myself to the stage. I felt like the stage was the only thing I had left. That's when I met Vanessa Alford, a girl who loved my husband much more than I did. In telling her story to Nancy, Lisa herself replayed these events in her head. She remembered Vanessa's face so naive, like a child's huge blue eyes, curved eyelashes, blonde hair the color of wheat, thin arms. She looked like an angel. Vanessa was from an esteemed family. Her parents were hereditary aristocrats. The girl became Lisa's understudy. She would play the lead in a musical if something happened to Lisa. However, Lisa sincerely believed that there was no enmity between them. On that unfortunate day, during the dress rehearsal, Vanessa complained of a sore throat in the dressing room. Lisa offered her tea, which she prepared herself. In such cases, Vanessa drank the drink. Soon the girl was hospitalized, diagnosed with poisoning. Suspicion, of course, fell on Lisa. At first, few people believed it. However, soon the details became clear. It turned out that Vanessa and Robert were lovers. The man, however, was not going to leave his wife for Vanessa. They continued the affair behind her back, staying in the theater longer than the others, locked in the dressing room. Lisa was the only one who didn't notice. She didn't notice her husband at all. Of course, members of the media clung to such a savory news as a tidbit. They began to make conjectures, bringing them one on top of the other. It was said that Vanessa's voice was used by Lisa to make her way on stage. The big news, however, was Vanessa and Robert's affair. They decided that the woman had taken out a stage rival and a rival in love. At first, Lisa believed that everything would be resolved peacefully, but already at the trial, she faced the harsh reality and betrayal. How did poison end up in your injuries? Vanessa's lawyer, hired by her parents, asked. I don't. My honor always rests on a shelf in the shared dressing room. Anyone could have, she muttered confusedly. Why didn't you have tea yourself that evening? He added. You love it, don't you? But I did drink it, insisted Lisa with a frown. If you had been drinking, you would have been lying in the next bunk with Vanessa. They were warming the bench, cheekily the defense attorney, trying to piss Lewin off. Later, Vanessa and the other girls from the theater testified. That's when Lisa realized she'd been wasting her time paying attention to anyone but. She had made enemies and envious people. They blatantly lied, accusing Lisa of hating Vanessa. I remember during rehearsal, she pushed Vanessa, and she nearly fell into the orchestra pit, the girl remarked. Lisa gasped. Actually, she rushed over to Alice to keep her from falling. The girl tripped during the dance rehearsal and lost her balance. Vanessa asked not to tell anyone about this unfortunate misunderstanding, so that she would not be removed from the role of understudy. Lisa had no idea what kindness would come out of it, and what rumors were floating around the theater. However, Lisa believed to the last that she would not be judged, except that Vanessa's parents turned out to have many more connections than the Lewin family. As a result, she ended up behind bars. What about your husband? Nancy asked. Did your husband end up not believing you? I see he doesn't come to see you. It's just my mom who brings the parcels. Robert said something during the trial that really got to me, Lisa admitted at the end. He said I would never poison Vanessa out of jealousy, because I never loved him. But out of jealousy of the scene one could. Then he looked me in the eyes and I realized how much pain and anger there was in him. He was angry because I couldn't love him and throw him out of my heart. First love, he hated that about me, so he decided that no one should get me. And here I am alone. You are not alone, smiled Nancy. She then began to fall asleep under the influence of the medication given by the doctor. Stephen was standing next to Lisa. She realized that he was listening to everything, but she didn't worry about it. It was even easier. Is she going to be all right? Lisa asked. She'd been wandering around all night with a fever. A scratch at that age can be fatal. But Nancy's all right. She's hanging in there. Of course, we'd better get her to a hospital. Who'd let her? She's lucky she thought to put on a jacket. The knife missed her, though the blow was severe. No major organs were hit. Lisa turned to Stephen. He was standing in a white doctor's coat with his hands in his pockets. Lisa didn't mean to, but smiled as if to an old friend. The handsome face of her former lover was like a ray of light in this dark, gloomy realm. Stephen, however, didn't smile back. You need to get out of here. There's no telling how many more attempts there will be to get rid of you. Nancy told me everything. Earl's inmate was more than a little angry. She blackmailed Christopher for another page to get a duplicate key to your cell. That kind of attitude is scary. Nancy thinks someone's hired you. The case involves more than a little bit of Lisa Poe's detainee animosity. Easy for you to say. Are you suggesting I spoon dig? He shook his head, then sat down in front of Lisa and took her hands in his. Lisa flinched, but didn't take her palms away. Her body felt as if an electric shock had gone through her. Listen carefully. We're going to help you. Okay, I got you out of here. But this will only be the beginning. You have to prove your innocence. You can't hide forever. Can I? I don't know. Mumbled Lisa, blushing. Stephen's fingers stroked her palms, making the butterflies that had long since slept, if not died, flutter again. Do you trust me? He asked insistently. I have a choice of allies here, a few, Lisa replied, lowering her gaze. Especially those who are skillful at revenge. Stephen smiled, then sushi. During the night, Lisa started moaning, so much so that Jenka woke up. She climbed down from her skates, tired of listening to her friend's sobs. What's wrong with you? God forbid you get stabbed. Does your stomach hurt? No strength. I'm sorry, Lisa sang. She'd been a performer in a musical, but she was doing great now. Miranda touched her face. It was wet. Her hair stuck to her suits. Lisa had washed with soda water before. A doctor was called. Lisa was taken to the infirmary. And there began the scariest part of the plan for the girl. Stephen explained that they would not let her go to the clinic so easily, so the man diagnosed her and made a cut on her stomach. And then what was the floor for? Only then did the doctor call the warden. Look, I did the best I could under these conditions. He demonstrated the scar. However, she needs full treatment and urgently. Otherwise, I'll have to write to the highest authority. There's a lot of noise around her. The supervisor shrugged her lips. I can't. Let me take her to my father's clinic to fix her up. We'll have her back in a week, Stephen suggested. We'll do it quietly. For a while, the boss was still resistant. But Stephen was too charming a man. A man like that, a woman could never refuse a request. And so Lisa found herself in a spacious ward under supervision. Stephen came to see her the next day. There's a guard on duty at the entrance. He will leave in 1 hour exactly, he announced, handing her a medical gown. Change and leave. There will be a black car waiting for you. Lisa did not argue. She realized it was better to trust Stephen completely and go with the flow. When the girl pulled the robe on, he turned away. She only grinned when she was done with changing clothes. Lisa turned to the savior. Thank you. He turned around, shook his head. It's too early to say thank you. When are we all done? Who are we? The woman frowned, unaware that someone else had been privy to the plans. The man grinned, you'll find out. At the appointed time, Lisa ran out of the hospital and into the car that was waiting for her. She literally fell into the back seat, gasping with excitement. What a spectacular appearance. You're definitely an entertainer, not a circus performer, poked the girl driver and hit the gas pedal. Lisa looked out from behind the seat and marveled. You? Molly glanced in the rearview mirrors. Who were you hoping to see? Vin Diesel from Fast and Furious. But forgive me graciously that your precious ass isn't being saved by him. Why aren't you helping them? You, Molly marveled. Self-importance. Actually, I'm helping my big brother. I thought you looked at him differently, Lisa grudgingly admitted. Molly, entering the corner abruptly, poked loudly. You have too rich an imagination. I just saw the way he fought back when you ran away from the wedding and disappeared for a month. He told you you were an idiot, and you came back with a ring on your finger without giving him a chance. At first I was glad. I thought he'd get over it, forget about you. But it wasn't happening. Stephen just got worse and worse, not realizing what he saw in you. But my brother loves you, so he got a job in circulation to keep an idiotic eye on you. Lisa's lips trembled with the urge to reply to Molly that she loved her brother too. But Lisa clenched her teeth, realizing that Molly wasn't the one who needed to hear those words. He's gone to jail. Because of me? She interjected. Molly rolled her beautiful eyes. And you think he just decided to change jobs, so to speak? The man got tired of the big money in the private clinic. He wanted a thrill. Are you really that naive, or are you just kidding? Lisa pressed her palms to her face. She even agonized thinking about Stephen. You didn't relax too much there. Molly pulled her out of the house. You're staying with me for a while. Stephen, you don't want to draw attention to yourself. And then we have to figure out how to get justice. You can't always be in hiding. It's one way to change your name, though. Did the exterior go to Cuba? No, Lisa cut her off decisively. I know what I want to do. Will you help me? Molly grinned, asking. Vanessa Alfort walked backstage at the theater. The girl had not been here before so deafeningly she bit her lips nervously. Tonight, after rehearsal was over, she had received a bouquet of scarlet roses and a strange letter that had been left in the dressing room. She didn't believe Lisa had written it, but who else would know about her affairs? There was only one line, a quote from a musical. If you lead them on by the nose, they don't realize you're cheap. And a place and time where they'd be waiting for her. And Lisa's signature. Vanessa looked around, but no one was there. Then she heard a rustle, then juice, 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 a woman's heels and silence. Vanessa got angry. Well, who's here? This isn't funny, she declared. She heard a woman's laughter in response. The acoustics of the stage and the specialty artists. Couldn't hear a word coming from the audience, but they could hear each other perfectly. Vanessa realized that the sender of the letter was somewhere nearby, but it was too dark. Come here, she sighed at the letter. What is the meaning of this? Who gave you the right? A click. A spot of soft light appeared on the stage. Vanessa Glass stepped out there, then took a step back. The letter fell out of her trembling hand. Standing on the stage was Lisa, dressed as the main character in the one whose role Vanessa had taken from her. She smiled haughtily and stared into Vanessa Alfort's face. Shaking. What are you doing? Why are you here? You're supposed to be in jail. Why do you think the innocent should be behind bars? Lisa grinned, taking a step forward. The singer moved gracefully, smoothly, as if she were swimming toward the victorious Vanessa. They let you go, Alfort whispered. Maybe, Lisa shrugged. Or maybe I escaped to meet you in person. You know, prison taught me a few things, like how to fight back. Want me to show you? Stay away from me. Waze chased Foxy down the fall. What do you want? Lisa shook her head. Were you shaking like that? However, at the trial lied, confidently hid her tears in a handkerchief. You weren't even afraid to drink poison just to get rid of me? That was a risky move. Then why are you so afraid of me now? Then Lisa stretched his lips in a crazy grin. I get it. Do you understand what I want to do? You feel you don't have much left. I got nothing left to lose. I'm going back behind bars anyway. Only this time for real crimes, not your fairy tale. What? Vanessa stammered, looking up at the woman looming over her. What are you up to? Lisa raised the hand she had been hiding in the folds of her dress. Vanessa clapped, yelped, and seeing the gun, Lisa pointed it at the girl. No, don't, I beg you. I'll do anything you want. Alfort cried. Lisa pretended to think about it. Then she nodded. I want to hear the truth. Then I'll probably give you a chance, or at least two, counting to 10 before I pull the trigger. Vanessa, punctuated by wet palms against the stage floor, slid under her elbows, nodded. Okay. She screamed hysterically. I'll tell you everything. Yes, I drank the poison myself. After we had tea, I put it in your warnig. What was I supposed to do? Robert only had eyes for you, and you raised us. I loved him. You had everything I wanted, you know? Everything. A man's main role. Glory, pay attention. And instead of getting the lead by working hard, you decided to push me around. Wouldn't it have been easier to poison me and go to jail? Poked Vanessa angrily. Look down. No, I wanted you to suffer, right, and then disappear. That's why I even paid those idiot newspapermen to be here. Vanessa ahead, realizing she had sold too much. Lisa was also surprised to learn that hating the Countess was the motive. Did you order my death? She asked deafeningly. Do you realize that another person suffered instead of me? A beautiful woman. Her blood is on your hands. Vanessa loudly cried. Clutching her hands into her hair, she shrank into a ball. Lisa became disgusted. She understood that Vanessa was a spoiled, arrogant girl, the favorite of rich parents. She could only think of herself. Lisa took the gun off the safety. Vanessa jumped like a hare when she heard the hunter. "That you promised." "I lied," Lisa replied dryly and pulled the trigger. Vanessa screamed, but nothing happened. She gingerly opened her eyes and looked at Lisa, who grinned and said bang. Vanessa had no sooner opened her mouth than she heard a popping sound. The backstage area behind where the women were standing began to rise. There were more claps. They turned into a flurry of applause. Vanessa was startled to see that there were many spectators to their conversation. Even Robert was among them. It turned out that the man had believed the naive girl Vanessa too, but now he had learned the truth. Lisa threw a gun at her feet, which turned out to be a fake. "You wanted the lead role? Enjoy," she said, and then retreated away. She found Steven standing in the shadows. He was picking up the backstage area and watching the woman with a burning gaze. Lisa hurried toward him, faltering in her stride, not saying a word. She threw herself around his neck and pressed her lips to his. Barely breaking the kiss, the woman whispered fervently, "I love you." "I'm sorry for everything, I love you so much." Steven smiled, "And you forgive me, my love." Then Lisa had a hard time. After all, she had escaped from prison. But Vanessa's confession and witness testimony played their part. The charges against her were dropped. She apologized. Aunt Nancy was soon released from the colony. Her beloved husband Lisa was waiting for her on the outside, who made a decision to help the old people in everything and provide them with a happy old age. Lisa's life took a new turn. She was now afraid of little and tried to live life to the fullest. You never know when you might be put behind bars. Lisa, now Lisa, was playing in Broadway musicals, just like she'd dreamed of as a child. This is her song. People laughed and cried ironically, but like the heroines of Chicago, she became famous and popular after the prison story. Today, however, 5 years after leaving prison, Lisa had her final role on stage waiting for her. After all, she recently found out that she is expecting a baby with her beloved husband, Steven. Therefore, the singer decided to take time out in her career, because family was more important to her than anything else in this world. Yes, the love of Steven Lisa began with deception. However, it passed all the tests. It ended by becoming simplistic and selfless. It's the kind of love you sing songs about, make movies about. Maybe someday they'll make a musical.